Hi guys, hope the audio is coming fine. Yeah, good evening. Thank you for joining the live stream. Today we are going to discuss two podcasts on the same podcast of a person called Tom Bilyeu, a very famous podcaster, a very favorite podcaster of mine. The appearance of two guests, Peter Schiff and Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio is a legendary investor. His net worth is $1.5 billion, so it's not like he's the Warren Buffett, but he is still one of the greats. So, for example, if you want to invest with him, that is, invest in his firm, for the minimum amount of money you need to have is about like $200,000-$300,000. Okay. So he's not like any random investor, but he's also very old, very experienced, and has written countless books. And the other guy is Peter Schiff, also an investor, asset manager, he writes some books, popular economics books. These two people are one of the more famous ones in the West for talking about de-dollarization and the impending market crash, that everything is going to hell because of USA's debt, etc. And the reason we are going to discuss him today, and the reason Ankit Shah is on the thumbnail of this, is because, of course, I have come to know about all this because of Ankit Shah. Because, see, market crash, the notion in the West is that market crashes will happen regardless of what you do after every 12-15 years. So one of them was supposed to happen at around 2020-21. So COVID happened, so the market crash happened anyway. So maybe things got delayed. But there are specific ways of thinking about it, a specific framework which is being given by Ankit Shah, which he himself has said that people like Ray Dalio and Peter Schiff are also talking about it. So then I actually went ahead and searched, and I hadn't checked out the Tom Bilyeu podcast in years. I last saw it about 3-4 years ago when David Goggins and all used to come, Jocko Willink. So then I found out that Ray Dalio and Peter Schiff have been Ray Dalio and Peter Schiff have spoken about this exact thing in the exact same ways as Ankit Shah. So what Ankit Shah has done is he has put his own brains, his own research into it. He has looked at what Ray Dalio has and Peter Schiff have also been saying, and then he has built on it as well. As in that if what Peter Schiff and Ray Dalio are saying is true, and based on the separate independent research that Ankit Shah has also done, which we have discussed, the exact things that he has also found out from his research, if that is so, then what are the specific India-centric consequences, okay? So Ankit Shah has done his own original research as well. And then there's the issue of the person who was talking about de-dollarizing and basically defunding the dollar in 2016-17. That guy is today the chief economic advisor of Joe Biden. So there are a lot of ways to look at it, and a lot of ways to basically conclude that maybe all of these people are right. And but maybe they won't be right in the end. But that is not our concern today exactly. Our concern today is exactly what is de-dollarization and why are people saying it will happen. So the why and how of it, and what is de-dollarization, what will the world look like. So of course, Peter Schiff and Ray Dalio don't get into the further the second order, third order predictions like Ankit Shah does. Ankit Shah is saying that the BRICS currency will replace the dollar. But you will notice that most of what they are saying is basically what Ankit Shah is also saying. As we found out from the Balaji Srinivasan podcast with Beer Biceps as well, that even he was ending up saying that, yeah, it kind of looks like it's going to that sort of a world. He, in fact, used the word de-dollarization. And now we see in the last few days, Kushal Mehra is also kind of saying the same things. Even Sushant Sareen and Abhijit Ayar Mitra have also kind of jumped on the wagon that, yeah, it seems to be going that way. But the main disagreement, I think a lot of us still have, even among the people who believe that dollar is going to hell, is that whether yuan replaces the dollar, and everyone agrees that also yuan is not going to replace the dollar, or whether BRICS currency can actually formulate. Okay, for example, libertarians believe, especially Indian libertarians, that BRICS currency is a pipe dream. It's never going to happen, not in our lifetimes, okay? And a lot of people believe that de-dollarization is also not going to happen in our lifetimes. So let's see what goes on in these conversations. Defense of Hindu theology, yes. Someday soon. Congratulations for the 7K subs. Yeah, thank you. Rakshit is saying he's Tantra Upasaka, so the deity he's worshipping might have given this knowledge. Okay. Let me check some comments. Love from Siliguri, thank you. How can Ankit Shah be so accurate, Dada? Because of the countless numbers of things he's looking at, and based on a particular way of looking at it. So you see, what we are getting from Abhijit Chavda, it has its own value. What the kind of geopolitics analysis we are getting from Abhijit Chavda, Adi Achint, and even Abhijit Ayar to a certain extent is basically a glorified Google search. वो तुम्हारे लिए गूगल सर्च करके सारा इंफॉर्मेशन इकट्ठा करके तुम्हारे मुंह पे डाल रहा है, ये देखो ये हुआ है. ओके, बट देयर इज नो फ्रेमवर्क ऑफ एनालिसिस हियर एंड देयर इज नो प्रेडिक्शंस ऑब्वियसली. तो दैट इज वेयर अंकित शाह इज डिफरेंट. Okay, so now let's start. Rakshit is saying, yes, none will know when and how it happened. After a few years, people will discuss about it. Let's start first with Ray Dalio, okay? And by the way, Ray Dalio is a big fan of Narendra Modi. Ever since Narendra Modi came to power, Ray Dalio has been saying, heaping showers of praises on Narendra Modi. And he is big time into transcendental meditation as well, which is basically Hindu thing. And in fact, I remember an interview Ray Dalio did with Gary Vaynerchuk, that famous investor, businessman, and motivational speaker, in 2016. Okay, so and they were talking about transcendental meditation, and Ray Dalio said that, see, there is this thing called transcendental meditation I do, where you have to go deep into that zone, and then you come out of it, and then you feel different, and then go about your day. Gary Vaynerchuk says that, but can you be in that zone all day? He was trying to hint at that maybe he doesn't even need to do transcendental meditation. He's in that high energy zone all the time in the day. And Ray Dalio specifically points out his mistake. He says, no. You have to do it. You have to do the meditation. You have to go into it, then come out of it. You can't feel like that all the time. Let's start with the podcast. So, okay, interestingly, what's coming worse is worse than a market crash. I thought we were going to discuss this. I did not know even 2 months back he has come. Okay, but actually we are, let's see, I am kind of prepared for this one. Which should we discuss? Now I'm in a dilemma. What's coming is worse than a market crash. Should we watch the more latest one then? And then we will discuss the Peter Schiff one as well. But he has actually explained very lucidly here. So let's check out this one only.
Talk to me about the three forces that you see that are influencing this moment. We've got banks collapsing, US dollars under attack, looming recession. What is going on? How do we step back and think about this moment?
I look at three major forces that are happening now, haven't happened in our lifetimes, but have happened many times in history. And those three major forces are the creation of a lot of debt and the printing of a lot of money to buy that debt, particularly because the government is running large deficits. And so they don't have enough money, so the government has to print that money. So that creation of all of that debt and its financial implications and its economic implications is one force. The second force is the internal conflict, the amount of conflict that's internally, largely due to the largest wealth gaps that we've had since the 30s. And that produces populism of the left and the right, particularly when there are financial difficulties. The third force is the rising power, challenging the existing power, largely in the form of China and to some extent Russia. So let's call it the great power conflict, because in 1945, there's a cycle. You have a war, then after a war, you have winners, and the winners determine the rules of the game. And then there's this evolution of others becoming more competitive, and then you have a conflict again for who's in control. So we have that dynamic taking place. So those three influences, the financial, the internal conflict, external conflict influences, are having a dominant influence. I learned before that when I was surprised Often it was because of things that hadn't happened in my lifetime before, but happened in history because of that reason. I went back and studied history, the last 500 years, on these cycles. There are big cycles that last about 75 years, give or take about 50 years, and of rises and declines. And I put that out because I think it's so important people understand that. I put it out in a book called The Changing World Order and in a free video called The Changing World Order. So when we look at each one of those, they're important. I also learned in studying history that there were two other influences that were very big, and you could see them. The first was acts of nature, such as droughts, floods, and pandemics, the changes over time in the evolution over time of people's learning and the technologies they make. So I'd say there are the really five big influences that drive everything, and they are the money and debt, economic influence, the internal conflict, the external conflict, the nature influence, and the, let's call it the technology influence. So as we go now into this, it's important. Again, I put it out as a free video on YouTube so that people could see it easily. And when we get into whatever we're going to talk about, it'll be certainly in the context of those things. And since they each affect each other, it produces what I call the big cycle.
The animation that you put out in conjunction with your book, Principles for Dealing with a Changing World Order, have influenced my thinking around this moment more than anyone or anything else. It makes it seem so predictable from a historical perspective when you look at that big cycle and you see how it repeats.
Yeah, Rakshit, he's bringing out a very important point here that India's inflation is pretty low at the moment, which commies, oh my god, by commies I mean anyone who is anti-BJP. They just refuse to understand this, why inflation works in the country. They keep blaming everything for, see, some of the inflation you can blame on the government. Why? Because a lot of inflation happens because of freebies, because of these things called DA, etc., DA allowance. And interestingly, Mamata Banerjee conveniently became a libertarian all of a sudden when people are pleading for her to give the DA according to the central government scale for about 7-8 years now, right? And just last year, like 5-6 months back, she said that we are not going to give DA now because there's going to be too much inflation because of the giving out of a DA. Now, that argument in theory is right, but it's still unfair for her to say that because people have paid their taxes for that DA for so many years. Okay, meaning the people of West Bengal. And the people in the central government, the employees of central government, they are also getting that DA. Every other state governments are also giving out the DA. It's only Mamata Banerjee who is not giving the DA because she's run out of money by paying for so many freebies and paying for the Durga Puja for all these clubs and all. Now she's paying to prop up another deity called Boroma to counter these Hindutvadis who don't understand Hinduism according to her. So now she says that, DA causes inflation, so we are not going to give it away. But interestingly, that's the one thing you can blame your particular government for when it comes to inflation. But most of the inflation is happening because we are dealing with USA, who is printing money all the time. And therefore, if you had 50 bucks in your hand and you could buy, let's say, a pack of chips with your 50 rupees, next day you will be able to buy just a cup of tea with your 50 rupees. That's the problem with inflation. But why then is India's inflation so much under control? Okay, people think India's inflation is going on, okay, rising prices of onions and stuff. It's still the least amount of price rise in the world. That is because of the things that Sanjeev Sanyal, etc. have done, which is targeted inflation. That, see, we are not going to be able to achieve 0% inflation. What we are going to do is create a framework where the inflation anyway, we are going to make it that it stays within the 6 to 8% range. And because of that, because it's sort of a life philosophy as well, that you prepare for 6-8% only. You quit the hope of achieving 0% inflation, target it at 6-8%, and that's how they have managed to keep it at 6% now. It's insane. It's a magical achievement, the amount of inflation India has right now. But commies refuse to understand this.
And so as you went through the last 500 years, one thing that you make very clear in the book is that the rise and fall of empires, the rise and fall of a reserve currency, they go in this 6-cycle trend. And the part that...
Sorry for pausing. Great comments have come. Friendly Vimana is saying, explain cycles of productivity. Cycles of productivity meaning there are phases of any country or any society's productivity. Sometimes they are less productive. Sometimes they are highly productive. For example, now USA is not very productive, okay, because they have basically handicapped themselves by not doing so many things. All they do is IT and tech, okay, and that too it's propped up with artificial money and artificial employment for no reason, for a lot of posts, okay, all of those jobs which will go away after the financial reset in 2024 or 2025. Next comment is Nina brings out a great point here, that BJP is consistent on inflation. Even Vajpayee had low inflation rates, whereas UPA always had high inflation. Nina, Vajpayee's low inflation might not be that much of a credit of Vajpayee, because back then we were not that much in sync with the American economy, okay, which is why you'll see that in the 2008 market crash, if you see the GDP growth rates of all the countries, everyone had a gigantic fall in 2008 because of dealings with USA. We didn't. Okay, that shows that back then in 1998 to 2002 as well, our dealings with USA probably wasn't that much high, and therefore maybe our inflation wasn't that high. And after Congress came to power, after UPA came to power, our dealings with USA increased. That's why inflation increased. And then there was so much freebies. There were so many bad loans being given out. So the cost of money, the value of money was going down more in times of UPA. The target is 4%. Okay, 4%. Yeah, I forgot. M. Shastri is saying computers in the business process disrupted the paper process and improved productivity. Yes. Actually, inflation of 4% is important for emerging country like India. If it falls below 3, we should worry more. Yes. But yeah, the inflation should not basically eliminate your salary increase, right?
I always find unnerving is phase 6 is basically war and collapse. And so you have that previously dominant power loses its position, loses its status as a reserve currency, and it loses it for pretty predictable reasons in the three forces that you were talking about in the beginning, discounting the fourth force, which I don't think in every cycle you always had, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't always have a pandemic or anything like that. But the fact that we're living in a moment right now where we have all of them. And so we've got, not only is it a moment of massive technological disruption right now, good and bad, but we've got the money printing, the meme on the internet is money printer go burr. So we've got, printing because of COVID. We've got printing coming off of printing because of the 2008 collapse. And now we're again seeing this cycle repeat itself. So I've heard you say that we're in somewhere in phase 5, which is as the empire begins to decline, as you have a rising superpower, as the debt bubble is getting out of control. With that perspective, was what happened with the SVB bank collapse, was that something that you knew, okay, something like that is coming, or was that a surprise to you?
No, it was obvious. Look, if you, I want to talk about the mechanics, really. I'm so eager to pass along an understanding of the mechanics so people themselves can do the analysis. So one man's debts are another man's assets. Okay, so what happened?
Remember these terms, guys. People who are not from economics and finance backgrounds, they are in the same boat as me. I'm also not from these backgrounds, so we will have to go through some portions with extra explanation. And people who are from economics and finance backgrounds, keep explaining as much as you can as well in the comment section, okay, for us lay people. But remember this phrase, one man's debt is another man's asset. Think about it.
The government had to sell a lot of debt. And when it sold a lot of debt, there were a lot of entities that bought a lot of bonds, government bonds. And money was very easy, which meant that short-term interest rates were very low. And money was actually being given away because they had interest-only
loans. This is
loans.
what Ankit Shah is saying, okay? When Ankit Shah says this, people smirk and laugh that, how can you say this, okay? That it was basically free money in USA. Because of their single currency reserve status, they were doing anything. They are still doing anything they want with the money. They need anything. They need money for anything. They'll just print it and hand out. And as a result of the extra money in the system, whatever money you are sitting with, that the value of that money goes down.
And interest rates were less than 1%, and you didn't have to pay back principal, so you could go get money. And so that created a lot of debt, and it created a lot of buying of government bonds. So what happened to Silicon Valley Bank is what happened to many entities all around the world, not just banks. They what does a bank do? A bank takes in deposits, typically, or debt in some way, and then it buys debt. It can do that in the form of making a loan, or it could do that in the form of buying a government bond, buying debt. And then when interest rates went up, the value of that debt went down. The money they had to give to depositors became more and more expensive. And also depositors, wanting them to be competitive, looked at money market rates or other rates and withdrew money from the bank because they had better uses. Okay, so what that leave them with? It's a banking problem that has happened literally for thousands of years. That what they do is the depositors, want their money back, and they're holding assets that are, in this case, have gone down in value, so they're broke.
Let me put a fine point on that. Sorry, before you move on, I don't know that people really understand this. Is this a it seems to be a necessary result of fractional reserve banking, meaning that if you deposit $10 to me, I only need to keep, and I think this is actually accurate, I only need to keep $1. And so the other $9 I can actually put to work in terms of loans to other people or investments. And that puts us in a position where, okay, technically you're giving the bank a loan. A deposit isn't just, oh, my money is in a vault somewhere. I've given the bank a loan, and the bank is going to go do things with that of varying degrees of risk. In the case of SVB, they thought I'm doing the least risky thing, which is...
SVB is the recent bank that collapsed, okay? Silicon Valley Bank. It's nothing to do with the region Silicon Valley, but the name of the bank is Silicon Valley, okay? One important comment here. It's so nice how they can talk about the most vulnerable thing of the American economy so openly, and Americans encourage that since it has high viewership. See, first of all, they have the Second Amendment. I mean, the First Amendment, which is freedom of speech. But also, you see, these people are not pointing out these mistakes, pointing out the flaws in the system because they hate the country or they hate the society. They are saying that we love the American society. It's an absolutely fantastic society. But this one thing, consistently, all governments have gotten wrong. The problem here is that I'm not defending the taking away of someone's freedom of speech, but the problem here you will see is that anytime someone points out a flaw with any action of the government, they make it sound like that India therefore is the worst country on earth, or India has all of a sudden become the worst country on earth. Society has become less tolerant because one prime minister has come to power, okay? But those sorts of things piss off one group of people.
I'm buying government debt. The government is going to back it. The government, especially the US government, can actually print money if they had to cover that, which they did in this case. But if a lot of people go to the bank at the same time, known as a bank run, and say, I want all of my money, the bank goes, whoa, I don't have that money. And so I have all these assets.
Right. Remember this point, guys. This is a great explanation for us laymen as well, that if all of your savings, even your EPF, Employment Provident Fund, is in the bank is using it to invest in the stock market as well, right? But what if one day everyone decides that, no, I actually want that money in my hands. I don't want it just in theory. That's called a bank run, and that's what happened in Silicon Valley Bank, and then it collapsed. It did not have so much liquid cash with them. That's the problem with gold ETFs as well.
As long as those assets remain liquid and I can liquidate them in a timely fashion.
Which Ankit repeatedly says that, let's say there's 1 gram of gold, but that 1 gram of gold has been bought by 1,000 people because everyone has invested in the paper version, the ETF version of that 1 gram of gold. So if theoretically that those now 1 lakh people demand that 1 gram of gold, no one is going to get it. So it's just all a made up fairy tale land.
And sure, as long as the request for people's deposits, all of my money, the bank goes, whoa, I don't have that money. And so I have all these assets. And as long as those assets remain liquid and I can liquidate them in a timely fashion, then sure, as long as the requests for people's deposits back are coming at a reasonable rate, all is well. But when you get a lot of people coming at once and you have the investments that they've made have gone down in value, now you get a perfect storm.
Exactly. I think you said it very well. You're allowed to be in the business. Let's call it 1/10. It's actually less than 1/10 is your money.
Whoa.
But let's call it 1/10. You have a certain amount of money up. They give you the deposits. You invest the money within these general guidelines. So, for example, government bonds are safe from default. So you buy the government bonds. You think you're making a spread. And then what happens is the government bonds go down in value at the same time as the people say, hey, I want to go take my money and put it someplace else. So you don't have enough money. And central banking works like that, except the government can print the money. So the risk, and when it's the government, is not that you won't get the money back unless, like in this particular case, for a bank, it goes down in value, so you ain't going to get that back. You're going to sell it. But anyway, you described it very well. What happens for the economy as a whole is then they print the money because they don't want defaults. There's a tolerable amount of defaults, and then you get past a tolerable amount of defaults, and it just crushes everything. And so they print the money. Okay. And so this thing with the bank is not a Silicon Valley Bank a loan issue. It's not a banking issue. It is a global issue in terms of...
It's not an issue with one bank. It's not just a banking issue. It's a global issue. That's it. That is also the Ankit Shah principle. Okay, Champaklal is pointing out a mistake I made, that a bank does not invest public money in stock market. They invest it to give house loan, right, car loans, business loan, etc. Doesn't the government do it though? Can you tell me surely if you have invested in whatever I mean anything that's under the government, don't they invest it in the stock market as well? Okay, the other important point that has come out here is that yes, M. Shastri is saying that Silicon Valley Bank collapsed because the Fed, which is their central bank, which is the equivalent of their RBI, assumed bank runs won't happen. They thought bank runs are a solved problem, and they did admit being underprepared and have bad advice. I would say they did it deliberately, okay, because the situation with USA is now that the things that seem very bad for a country, USA will have to do those things deliberately in order to have a stable society. Whether it's devaluing their dollar, okay, whether it's getting rid of their minimum wage laws, whether it's lowering their standard of living, or whether it's letting these banks go to hell, all that they will have to do in order to survive this market crash or in a de-dollarized world, because otherwise none of their products, services, anything is competitive in the entire world. No, they do invest there in America. India does not allow. Okay. Banks have their own mutual funds, so yes, they can invest money in any assets they deem fit to invest in.
All around the world, all sorts of entities, pension funds, insurance companies, all around the world, there was a lot of the buying of these government bonds, which have gone down in value. And if you then take it and you say, what's the value of those? Those have gone down. And the cost of money is high. And so the world is leverage long, okay? Long, meaning they own stuff, and they borrowed money to own it, and it's going down in value.
How nightmarish does that scenario become? So you've got your money locked up in something for a long time, but it's declining in value. Is this like a classic moment where we can look at this big cycle and go, oh, we know where this goes, like the music has stopped, everybody, or no, it's a bit harder to judge than that?
I think it's pretty easy to judge on an intermediate or longer term basis, because there's a choice, right? The big issue is, okay, the government can come in and print the money and give money to anybody they want to give money to. But when they do that, that typically devalues the money.
Yeah.
So think about it, if you're holding a bond, you got a claim on money, but the claims are too much. So
would it be fair to call our fixed deposits, FD is the equivalent of the American bond, treasury bond?
So one way or another, you're either not going to get back that money in full, or you're going to get back money that's worth less because they print the money.
Whoa. Ray, I've never heard anybody say it like that. So let me just make sure that I understood that. The government has effectively issued too many bonds, so people they're holding...
And a lot of companies and a lot of other things too.
Okay, very good point. So we're not just buying the bonds from the government, we're buying corporate bonds, municipal bonds, like anybody that wants to put some debt out into the market. Government, of course, in fact, I'm actually curious, what's the ratio roughly, if you know this, between corporate debt and government debt?
Well, right now, I couldn't give you the exact number off the top of my head, but there's household debt, corporate debt, and government debt.
Yeah, that's terrifying. So even if you took every dollar that our entire country makes, I think it's true globally. If you took every dollar that we make globally and tried to pay off the debt, you wouldn't be able to do it.
Well, that's right. But it's not expected to pay it off in a year.
Sure.
I want to go back to my main point to make this clear. If you're holding that debt, you are holding something that money will come back. Let's say and the government can print the money, but if the money's hard, if that's going to be good money that's coming back, it's going to be hard for those entities to pay back because it's a lot relative to their income and cash flows to pay it. And that means that the default risk rises. However, because you're holding that, it means that the debt will be bad one way or another. It's either bad because they don't pay it and needs a haircut for them to pay it, or because they do pay it with money that is going to be printed to come back. So when you look at that, and that problem occurs when there's a lot of debt assets and a lot of debt liabilities. So think of it this way, just want to make this clear. When there was the position that interest rates got a lot below the inflation rate, you're losing buying power. There's no good reason to own that. And there's a change in psychology, because before there was, I own bonds, The bonds go up in value as interest rates go down. So I'm getting a price appreciation, even though I'm getting, let's say a low interest rate. But inflation isn't a problem until it's a problem. Then when it's a problem, because they print so much money and they put it out, then inflation goes up and a light bulb goes off. That light bulb used to be, okay, how much am I earning? Okay, I'm not earning much, but it's okay. The price of the bond or whatever's gone up. But anyway, I'm holding it and it's safe. And then people realize it's not safe because I'm losing money to inflation. So now you have the central bank wanting to rectify that imbalance by, real interest rates were minus 1.7%.
Meaning that inflation was chipping away at your buying power.
Yes, if I look at inflation index bonds as an indicator, or other indicators, I'm losing percentage points to inflation by holding that bond. And then when and people realize that, well, you don't want to do that. And then the other side of it was you want to buy and borrow and buy stuff because, money's free. So companies borrow and buy stuff and individuals borrow and buy houses because interest only loans on the houses. I mean, okay, I can buy a house, I can buy an apartment. And so, but that creates the imbalance where it's terrible to be a lender and a creditor. And it's good to be a borrower and do that. So that imbalance takes place. It produces inflation. And then when it produces inflation and so on, and then then you say, I don't want to own these things anymore. And then, and also the Federal Reserve says, I better fight inflation. They change things. And so by raising interest rates to levels in which it goes from minus 1.7% in inflation index bonds to plus 1.7%, and it makes it, and it raises the short-term interest rates, real interest rates much higher, then lo and behold, all the people who did all those things get hurt. Okay, they borrowed, they bought the bonds, they bought all of those things and all of those debt instruments. And also companies, look at the companies that are affected. Because yields got so low, tech companies and others, those who have a dream, they don't have to necessarily make profits. They're selling a dream and the money's got to be invested. And so you see all of that change radically when that tightening of monetary policy. So now you sit there and have a lows. So when you're looking at the big picture, think of it as all like banking. You're holding all these financial assets. What is the value of a financial asset? It has no intrinsic value. Its only value is what it can buy. But there are many, many more financial assets out there, the most financial assets out there that there's ever been relative to the value of stuff to buy. There's too many claims out there. It's like musical chairs. Okay, if everybody says, oh, wait a second.
Okay, Abhay and Rishabh, actually it gets easier sometimes and a little too technical sometimes, but they are still discussing that inflation only, that you took up so many assets, but because of the government's policies, the value of those assets kept decreasing over time. Okay, I wanted to reply to some above comments. Wait. So yeah, No Name said that Ankit Shah ने कोई research paper निकाला है क्या? What do you mean by saying his research? His PhD thesis paper was on the impact of e-commerce on local Indian small businesses. But the rest of his research is whatever he has found out from different financial journals, etc. And he has basically presented those findings of those researchers in podcasts only, which we have discussed in our past live streams as well. And one thing was there. KK Agarwal is saying that RBI, I think, regulates banks more than Fed. This is 100% true. India's banking system is now way tighter, cleaner, better than I think the entire world's banking system.
Let me get my stuff. Let me convert my debt assets. I want to get my stuff. I want to get real stuff. That's a real problem. And so that's the global picture on the first of those 5 influences, right? The fact that it's happening with the other influences is very important because they affect each other. So this financial picture, by the way, is the same as in the 1930 to 45 period and the same as they were throughout history.
You can reboot your life, your health, even your career, anything you want, all.
Bank also gives out 7%. So FD interest rate now is 7%, right? And inflation rate is what? 6%. So yeah, only 1% profit is still going on.
Started today.
Yeah. For people that don't know, that's World War II. Just
it started with a financial crisis that then caused internal conflict.
Okay.
What do we do about the
Now he's tracking the history. Okay, that how did the previous financial crashes and the reset happened. Okay, so Tom Billieu says it started with World War II, right? And Ray Dalio corrects him, saying that no, it started with other things which led to World War II. Then these things happened.
Financial crisis, the populism of the left and populism of the right in this internal fighting, and 4 countries that were democracies chose not to be democracies because of the conflicts that were existing. And those countries were Germany, Italy, Spain, and Japan, because there's a lot of internal conflict over wealth when you have that. And so that creates a lot of internal disorder, a lot of fighting, okay? In some ways, almost civil wars forms everywhere, some form of civil war. Who wins the internal war? And of course, that happens also at the same time as there's the external conflict. So first of all, everybody's fighting over resources. You have populists come to power, and the populists are not compromisers the way democracies work.
Yeah, let's fight. I'm going to fight for you. Don't worry, I'm not in the middle. I'm not going to compromise.
And you've got to pick a side. And so the moderates, there's no place for moderates. You've got to pick a side. And the sides are, let's say, internally in the country, the left and the right, and externally, I don't know, the Americans and the Chinese, or the Americans, okay, and you got to pick a side and fight. And so that becomes
and you see, unfortunately, increasingly, that's a situation also coming about in all around us as well. कि तू मेरे तरफ है, पूरी तरह से मेरे तरफ काहे नहीं है भोसड़ी के. That's the problem they are discussing, that this has happened in the past as well.
Dynamic that is these periods of time. And these periods of time have typically lasted about 10 to 15 years. And they have various symptoms to it. So in the book, I write out, there's like a disease, like a cancer. You see stage 1, 2, 3, 4. If you have these things, you could look at it and you could diagnose, and you see it moving from stage 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 and to 6. You could see that taking place. And each time you come closer to a bad set of circumstances, bad financial circumstances, and bad fighting over things.
Yeah, so this is where
let's for the people joining here for the first time, or people unaware of what is the Ankit Shahi principle, etc. Let's give a basic primer here. So Ankit Shah and these people are saying that since USA has printed so much amounts of dollar, इतना सालों से, okay, इतना डॉलर प्रिंट किया है फालतू का, जब खुद का मर्जी हुआ तब डॉलर प्रिंट कर लिया. और ये 1945 से शुरू नहीं हुआ है, ये 1971 के बाद से शुरू हुआ है. ओके 1971 में उनके प्रेसिडेंट निक्सन ने अचानक एक दिन सुबह उठ के घोषणा कर दी कि हमारा जो डॉलर है, इस डॉलर का कोई एसोसिएशन गोल्ड से नहीं रहेगा. गोल्ड से पेग्ड था करेंसी, उसको पेग करना बोलते हैं. तो जब तक डॉलर गोल्ड से पेग्ड था, गोल्ड है एक फाइनाइट रिसोर्स, तो गोल्ड का जो प्राइस होगा, गोल्ड का प्राइस डिपेंड करेगा गोल्ड कितना है दुनिया में उसके ऊपर. अब उसके ऊपर डॉलर का अगर प्राइस एसोसिएटेड है विद गोल्ड, तो डॉलर भी अपने दिमाग में जो जितना मर्जी हो उतना प्रिंट नहीं कर सकते, क्योंकि वो तो पेग्ड है डॉलर से. निक्सन आके बोलता है कि वी आर टेकिंग इट आउट ऑफ द गोल्ड स्टैंडर्ड, अब हम जितना चाहे प्रिंट करेंगे. तो 1971 से ये अनलिमिटेड प्रिंटिंग शुरू होता है. तो अब जो लोग यूएसए के साथ डील करते हैं, या फिर बेसिकली डायरेक्टली और इनडायरेक्टली पूरा का पूरा दुनिया यूएसए के साथ डील करता है, बिजनेस करता है, क्योंकि यूएसए का जो पावर है, मिलिट्री पावर है, जो कि सब वर्ल्ड वॉर 2 के बाद से ऐसे ही आ गया, क्योंकि बाकी पूरे दुनिया में किसी के पास मैन्युफैक्चरिंग पावर ही बचा नहीं था. सब ने यूथ करके अपना मार दिया सब कुछ. और इंडिया तो था ही गरीब, और उसके बाद भी सोशलिज्म करवा रहा था. तो यूएसए जिसके पास प्रोडक्टिविटी है, मैन पावर है, वो सब है, मिलिट्री पावर है, अब वो डिसाइड करता है कि अब हम जितना चाहे प्रिंट भी करेंगे. तो उसके पहले जो स्टैचर पूरे दुनिया में पाउंड का था, वो स्टैचर डॉलर का हो जाता है. वो स्टैचर क्या है? सिंगल करेंसी रिजर्व. ओके, सिंगल करेंसी रिजर्व स्टेटस. ओके, कि पूरे दुनिया में सबके पास सिर्फ डॉलर रहेगा. ओके, एज अ वे टू ट्रेड इन बिटवीन कंट्रीज. ओके, तो अब अगर पाकिस्तान और भारत अपने आप में बिजनेस करे, उसके लिए भी डॉलर ही यूज़ होगा. उसके लिए पाकिस्तान का करेंसी या इंडिया का करेंसी नहीं यूज़ होगा, क्योंकि डॉलर का इतना स्टैचर है, इतना रिस्पेक्ट है पूरे दुनिया में, डॉलर में सब कोई ट्रेड करेंगे. तो इसका मतलब क्या है? तो अब पाकिस्तान से मैं अभी एक बोतल दारू खरीदूँ, उसके लिए मुझे शायद 2000 रुपये देना पड़े. 2000 रुपये मुझे डॉलर में देने पड़ेंगे उसको. उसके लिए मेरे पास डॉलर रहना है। तो अगर मेरा इतना डॉलर है, पूरी के पूरी दुनिया में डॉलर का इतना डिमांड है, उसके लिए यूएसए का डॉलर का वैल्यू और भी बढ़ रहा है। ओके, वैसे ही बढ़ गया था बिकॉज ऑफ द थिंग्स दैट हैपेंड फ्रॉम 45, और अब पूरे दुनिया में ऐसा सिचुएशन हो गया कि सबको डॉलर में ही ट्रेड करना पड़ रहा है। उसके लिए डॉलर का डिमांड और भी बढ़ रहा है। थिंक ऑफ एनी नेशंस करेंसी एज दैट नेशंस स्टॉक। ओके, तो द डिमांड ऑफ दैट स्टॉक ऑफ यूएसए इज गोइंग ऑन इंक्रीजिंग, तो वो स्टॉक का प्राइस इज ऑल्सो इंक्रीजिंग। और उसके बाद 1971 में निक्सन डिसाइड करता है कि चलो अब ऐसे ही प्रिंट करना भी शुरू कर देंगे। उसके बाद प्रॉब्लम क्या होता है इन्फ्लेशन का, कि अगर तुम्हारे पास $600 बिलियन था, जैसे कि आज हमारे पास है रिजर्व करेंसी, तो हमारे पास $600 बिलियन से आज अगर हम शायद एक वॉरशिप खरीद सके, 10 साल बाद उस $600 बिलियन से हम एक कुत्ता भी नहीं खरीद पाएंगे। ओके, क्योंकि उसने तो और भी $3 ट्रिलियन प्रिंट कर दिया है 2-3 सालों में। जैसे कि हुआ है, हमारे आज तक का जीडीपी है $3.75 ट्रिलियन, और कोविड के बाद से 3 साल में यूएसए ने प्रिंट ही कर दिया है $3.3 ट्रिलियन। ओके, जिसके वजह से अब बाकी देशों में एक कंसेंसस जैसा आ गया है। ऐसा अंकित शाह बता रहे हैं कि ये डॉलर के ऊपर डिपेंडेंसी हम बंद कर रहे हैं। एटलीस्ट हम अपने आप में जब बिजनेस करेंगे हम डॉलर यूज़ नहीं करेंगे, और बाकी पूरे दुनिया के लिए भी हम एक ब्रिक्स करेंसी लाएंगे। ये अंकित शाह का मानना है। ब्रिक्स करेंसी, ब्राज़ील, रशिया, इंडिया, चाइना, साउथ अफ्रीका और जो देश एप्लीकेशन दे रहा है ब्रिक्स में आने का, हम खुद का एक करेंसी बनाएंगे, जो करेंसी विल बी पेग्ड टू अगेन सम फाइनाइट अमाउंट ऑफ प्रोडक्ट्स। ओके, और उसमें सिर्फ गोल्ड भी हो सकता है, व्हीट, राइस, जो भी हो सकता है। इट विल बी अ बास्केट ऑफ कमोडिटीज, फाइनाइट कमोडिटीज, जो एक्चुअली एग्जिस्ट करता है दुनिया में, कल्पना में एग्जिस्ट नहीं करता है, और उससे पेग्ड होगा हमारा ये ब्रिक्स करेंसी टू रिप्लेस दिस डॉलर। क्योंकि डॉलर का क्या प्रॉब्लम है कि पहली बात तो है इन्फ्लेशन। अब सिर्फ इन्फ्लेशन प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, डॉलर का एक और प्रॉब्लम है कि अब यूएसए को जो पसंद नहीं आता है, अचानक एक दिन सुबह उठ के उसको सैंक्शन कर देता है। अगर उसके पास सैंक्शन करने का पावर है, वो है ही क्योंकि डॉलर रिजर्व करेंसी है पूरी दुनिया में। अगर डॉलर पूरे दुनिया में रिजर्व करेंसी नहीं रहता है, तब यूएसए भी यहाँ वहाँ जाके कभी कहीं ना कहीं किसी को सैंक्शन नहीं कर पाएगा। ये है बेसिक। Argentina revoked from BRICS. Yes, because Argentina's president is kind of sort of a vassal of USA, okay, for now, because he is libertarian, etc. USA inflation was low because the demand for dollar is high. Yes, and now it's not anymore. All because dollar is reserve currency. Yes, so it will be always in demand and prevent devaluation. So basically, USA was printing as much as they want and importing goods from other countries with free money. Yes, and these are now we will have to get into completely Ankit Shah territory now, but see. How did Amazon was able to sell you goods at a price lesser than what your local kirana shop was selling you? Okay, क्योंकि किराना शॉप वाले को तो वो दुकान का फिजिकल प्रॉपर्टी मेंटेन करना पड़ता है, ये तो ऑनलाइन आ रहा है। फिर भी अगर वो प्राइस हम काउंट में नहीं भी करते हैं, वो किराना शॉप का मेंटेनेंस का प्राइस, फिर भी Amazon etc. ई-कॉमर्स, they are selling you things at way cheaper than it is humanly possible. ये पॉसिबल हो रहा है क्योंकि Amazon का जो प्रॉपिंग अप है, Amazon का जो फंडिंग है, वो सब तो मेनली अमेरिकन इन्वेस्टर्स से आ रहा है। अमेरिकन इन्वेस्टर्स के हाथों में क्या आ रहा है? वो है ऐसे ही कल्पना में प्रिंट किया हुआ डॉलर। तो उनका इनोवेशन बोलो, आईटी रेवोल्यूशन, ये सब कुछ ये अनलिमिटेड डॉलर प्रिंटिंग की वजह से ही हुआ है। तो ऐसा नहीं है कि हमारे पास अब डॉलर प्रिंटिंग नहीं था इसलिए हम इनोवेशन नहीं कर पाए, ऐसा नहीं है। एक इकोनॉमिक विजन भी होता है। तो वो लोग ऐसे भी कर सकते थे कि हम प्रिंट भी करेंगे मगर देश सोशलिस्ट रखेंगे। ओके, लाइसेंस के चक्कर में इलॉन मस्क को देश से निकाल देंगे, वैसा वो कर सकते थे, वैसा उन्होंने नहीं किया है। तो हमने दोनों तरफ से ही प्रॉब्लम फेस किया। ना हमारे पास जो जी में प्रिंट करने का पावर था, ना हमने एक इनोवेशन का एक एनवायरनमेंट मेंटेन किया। वो उन लोगों ने दोनों ही किया।
Really breathtaking. So you've talked a lot about this idea that there are things, you even mentioned at the beginning of this episode, there are things that have not happened in our lifetime, but they happen over and over and over. And so it is very easy for me as somebody born in the 70s to think, oh, war isn't a thing that happens in the US, it's something that happens elsewhere. Populism isn't something that happens in the US, it's something that happens elsewhere. But it does happen. We're seeing it ratchet up right now.
Sorry for pausing again. Yes, almost all e-commerce sites are in losses, Flipkart, etc. So I don't think Amazon is in loss, right? But again, that's also because of them being mainly funded by dollar.
Because of that, I heard you once say, and I think this is really important for people to understand about the internal conflict. In fact, you and I bumped into each other in Dubai, and I was saying, Ray, as given everything that's going on, how do I think? How do I think about where to live? Whatever. And you said, Tom, the only thing that matters is how people are with each other. And for whatever reason, it really hit me that time what you meant by that, and I understood the importance of this conflict. And what I heard you say previously is that in the French Revolution, it was the moderates that got the guillotine. It's like you are forced, because I consider myself
ऐसा सिचुएशन आ रहा है कि moderates को सबसे पहले मार दिया जाएगा, उनको बचाने का कोई नहीं रहेगा, क्योंकि they are not sufficiently satisfyingly in one side enough.
Centrist in nature, and you find yourself, as things escalate, being forced to take a side, which the French Revolution one gave me pause. I was like, not how I would want to end up as a moderate. Really fast, going back to...
Ankit Shah would argue that e-commerce companies have high revenue growth. That's because of the incessant dollar printing, artificial dollar printing, artificial growth.
That this is a global moment. It's a predictable part of the process. That stage 5, the debt is too much. Interest rates are now going up to keep inflation from running away. We printed money like crazy. You've got the rise in conflict. When the Fed printed money to backstop what looked like it was going to be a potential contagion from SVB, obviously I think there were 5 banks that ended up failing. Is this now contained, or is what the Fed did just going to forestall something that's inevitable?
The dominoes are beginning to fall. I mean, okay, you know what the next dominoes are, and you can imagine the other dominoes. So, for example, they're not going to buy the debt. A lot of them are not. Those who bought the debt and have too much debt and have debt losses on government debt are not going to buy more of that debt, for example. And therefore, when the government sells more of the debt, there's not going to be an adequate number of buyers for that debt. You know that those who are hurting because they have those losses won't make loans, and a lot of those loans went to real estate, particularly commercial real estate. And you know that for various reasons in commercial real estate, that we don't use it the same way and so on. So you're going to have problems in commercial real estate. You know that this kind of money was also financing venture capital and private equity entities that also have cash flow problems, challenges. And so you know that funding is not going to be there in the same way. You know, as a result of these things, that a number of entities will cut costs, and in their...
Okay, this is pure Ankit Shah territory, okay? That kind of funding is not going to be there, and companies are going to cut costs. And by cost cutting meaning, पहली बात तो ये है कि ये जो फालतू के एम्प्लॉयमेंट्स बना रखे हैं बहुत सारे कंपनीज में, स्पेशली आईटी सेक्टर में, ये सब नौकरी जाएंगे. बैंकिंग में, कंसल्टेंसी में, सब फील्ड में ही, जो कि अंकित शाह बार बार प्रेडिक्ट कर रहे हैं, जो कि हो भी रहा है काइंड ऑफ, बट इट्स प्रीटी ग्रेजुअल. दे आर डूइंग इट प्रीटी सेनली सो दैट people don't lose their mind, so that societies don't go to hell completely. I'm Shastri saying you have to look at the company balance sheet to figure out what's happening. That is because of market value, which is notional. New warehouse, new delivery vehicles, supply centers, yes. That growth definitely is happening. But would you say it will happen even if of all these things happen? See, because USA has said, the opposition has said that we are going to allow you to print whatever money you want until 2025. What is special about 2025? According to Ankit Shah, in 2025, after UK elections happen, that's when the final negotiations are also going to start, okay? Between the BRICS countries and the first world countries who have been enjoying this reserve country status for all these years. कि चलो अब बोलो क्या क्या हमारा बास्केट ऑफ स्टॉक्स होगा, किस किस चीज़ के साथ हम हमारा करेंसी पेग करें, और तुम यहाँ पे क्या क्या इन्वॉल्वमेंट चाहते हो. अब बोलो, ओके. आफ्टर 2025 इलेक्शंस हैपन, बिकॉज 24 में यहाँ का इलेक्शन हो गया, यूएसए का हो गया, 25 में यूके हो गया, ओके. ऑल द रेलेवेंट कंट्रीज का इलेक्शन 24-25 में हो रहा है. इसीलिए 25 तक जो कुछ प्रिंट करना है कर दो, ये बोल रखे हैं. अब यूएसए का तो डेट है $33 ट्रिलियन, ओके. उनका जीडीपी है $23 ट्रिलियन, डेट है $33 ट्रिलियन. तो जिसका मतलब है कि जो इन्वेस्टर्स ने सारे के सारे पैसे डाल रखे हैं इस कंपनीज में, ये सब हवा में उड़ जाना है, क्योंकि उसका कोई वैल्यू ही नहीं रहेगा. अगर डी-डॉलराइजेशन हुआ तो फिर भी कितना स्टेबल करके एक लैंडिंग दे सकते हैं इन कंपनियों को, ये सब 25 के बाद होगा. तो उसके बाद अगर ये ग्रोथ रेट नहीं रहा, तो वी विल अंडरस्टैंड दैट द ग्रोथ दैट इज हैपनिंग नाउ इज बिकॉज ऑफ द incessant printing.
Various ways, and so depending on that, the job market is changing. You see it, for example, in tech jobs and other. If you're some of those areas that are getting squeezed. And you see the same thing by and large, happening internationally. So you can see also that if you said, what is the value of those assets that are being held, that value has gone down a lot. And because it was bought on leverage, as you described, because it is bought on leverage, there are bad losses in different places. And then the question is, what are you going to do with those losses? In most cases, quite often, they're, don't mark them to the market, meaning don't account for them and recognize those losses, which is kind of, let's say, hiding those losses and hoping in time that they'll just over time, it'll be fine. But that'll produce a squeeze. That'll produce a problem. So I think we know those things. We know those things. And that's happening at the same time as we have an internal conflict taking place, such as the presidential election. So we're going to come into the presidential, and it's not just presidential election. Of course, it's a number of senators, congressmen, and so on, and who are at each other's throats about this, and who are going to fight with each other. Okay, and fight to win, not probably respect the rules as much, but fight to win for their side, and that's happening at the same time as we have the situation with China, most importantly, China and Russia, in terms of the issues, in terms of their things to fight over. For example, even there's going to be an election in Taiwan that'll also have a big bearing on this whole thing. So there's, we know, I think, pretty much that we're going to have financial problems and economic problems at the same time as we have this internal fighting and this external risky situation.
You're at a stage in your life where you really want to help people understand the mechanisms, how to think.
Okay, guys, this is a fascinating situation now. Champak Lal, Rakshit Yadav, M. Shastri, everyone is agreeing here that BRICS is still a long shot, which all libertarians who understand deep technical economics as well in India, they are also saying that BRICS currency is not happening anytime soon. Then what do you think is going to happen, guys? Because if de-dollarization, let's say, happens, or at least dollar goes bust completely in 2025 to 24, this next financial reset or at least a crash, if not a reset, a crash happens, then how does the world handle this situation without replacing the dollar? Something has to replace the dollar at the moment, because dollar can't be trusted on anymore, right? Dollar can't be used, dollar can't be held anymore. तब क्या करे? BRICS currency नहीं करे तो क्या होगा? So predict more, I'm saying. And Ninad is saying, Dada, you are having more economic topics than cultural topics. I found it more interesting than economic and geopolitical situation. So you see, right-wing infighting में फालतू में side लेना होगा, and we kind of have discussed already that there are nuances to both sides' arguments, and a lot of things need to be fought out. A lot of these simmering conflicts were going on for a long time, which were not coming out on the forefront, and I think it's absolutely great that it's coming out in the forefront. See, one of the atheist justifications for idol worship or temples, religion itself, would be that it helps you coalesce a society behind something, right? So therefore, in looking at it in an atheistic way, Ram Mandir is such a great thing, because it's making you say those things, that what do you exactly believe. ये अंदर बात करना बहुत हो गया, अब बाहर ला के बोलो तुम्हारा एग्जैक्ट क्या आर्ग्यूमेंट है, और उसके बाद डिसाइड करते हैं कि तुम्हारा माइंड चेंज हो रहा है या फिर तुम किसी और साइड में जा रहे हो. ओके, let's have these discussions out in the open, and that's happening, and it needs to be given some time. Let's see where this leads. I think it's great that this is happening
through this stuff from a framework perspective, so that we can apply it, God forbid, in the post-Ray Dalio era. Let me run you through how I'm thinking about this moment, the questions that I'm asking myself, and then if you don't mind, help me correct the approach that I'm taking to this. So whenever we get in a moment where there's really, we're at what I see as the end of stage 5. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Okay, interesting, guys. So you all are saying not specifically BRICS currency, but what Ankit Shah was saying will happen with the BRICS currency. You all are saying that it will happen basically for the entire world. So not BRICS, but world currency, but in the same way that everything will be pegged to some finite commodities.
So this is where, just again, to reiterate, so we've gotten over our skis on debt. The Fed is going to try to print their way out of this. All that does is create inflation. They try to break the back of inflation with high interest rates, but so many people got themselves into debt in the good times on variable interest rates, or that they bought long on something like a bond where it devalues based on what happens with the interest rates. So as the interest rates go up, either people just can't make their interest rates payments, or the debt that they were holding goes down in value. Okay, so you've got this moment where a lot of people are about to lose money, and a lot of people are going to be very uneasy. And you've got the political divide that's continuing continuing to escalate. We saw the last election cycle here in the US where people stormed the Capitol. It was a very sort of unnerving moment. And now it's like, well, things weren't nearly as bad then as they are coming into the 2024 election. So I start thinking, okay, what is the safe move? And if I'm honest, Ray, I start looking at, where do I live? So is there a move to be made within the US? And so I start looking at places that feel more secure for the way that I think about the world. Or I start thinking, do I become a more globally mobile citizen?
Okay, Buddy One is saying something important. Conspiracy Operation Sandman, yes guys. Which says that 161 countries, including USA, has actually been part of BRICS plus, but only disclosing something as time passes. This is very, very plausible, guys. This is absolutely believable and plausible. And the fact that the idea of BRICS wasn't even brought up by the BRICS countries themselves. It was brought up by Goldman Sachs, right? Or some other big asset management firm. I think Goldman Sachs only. They were the first who started thinking, I think back in 2002, that, the way dollar is going, I think these BRICS countries will do something between themselves and will challenge the dollar. Or maybe then we can have them as a controlled opposition. Okay, this is very plausible and very believable.
Is there something that I should be thinking about there? I've got a lot of my money in cash. And then one thing that we didn't talk about, which we probably should, you mentioned the word hard money. And so hard money, I'll give my layperson's definition. And then if any of this is inaccurate, please let me know. But hard money being something that has intrinsic value. So gold, precious metals become something that I start thinking more seriously about. Now, I'm what I'll call a digital native. So I think about Bitcoin is something on my radar. I know that you're maybe not a fan. But anyway, that's how I'm thinking about the world. I'm trying to be in cash. I'm not trying to be in anything long. I have Ray Dalio.
Yeah,
I have zero
Ray Dalio
leverage.
is not that big on Bitcoin. And even in India, cryptocurrency is going to be taxed the fuck out of it. So it's going to be relevant basically in India.
I don't play with leverage. Even when the money was free, I didn't take on any leverage because that's the one thing that scares me. So safety is how I'm thinking about things. Now, I don't exactly know how to diversify well, but that becomes another part of how I look at this. And you've got the all-weather strategy that I know you've tried to articulate for people. So safety first, if I had to sum up my stance.
Everything you said is beautiful and very similar to the way I think.
Sorry for pausing repeatedly, guys. We are having a great discussion. Okay, M. Shastri is saying RBI and Finance Ministry has long-term goals to make rupee into a reserve currency. This is where I'm a little skeptical that I don't think any country has the stature and currency or even the power to have their currency as a reserve currency for the entire world. I don't think we will ever get to that place ever again where one currency will be the currency for the entire world. I think what you all were saying previously that every country will do it on issue basis. Okay, कि इस business के लिए हम ये currency use करेंगे, इस business के लिए ये दोनों देशों में हम ये currency use करेंगे, वैसा ही होगा I think. Or if CBDC happens, then it's a different ball game altogether. Okay, then we have different predictions to put in place. With CBDC, it's a completely different beast altogether, right? There's no question of printing even. Okay, so CBDC तो हो गया communism currency. Then again, as a result of which, again Ankit Shah is saying that therefore barter system might come back that everything is going to be taxed so much. So let's leave it at that. If I want to buy a second-hand guitar from you, I will arrange a song for you. Something like that might happen.
I'll add a couple of things to it. But when we think about safety, we have to think about that as purchasing power. Because a lot of people think if I put my money into a treasury bill, I get safety. Well, look at whether that's giving you a return that's compensating for inflation. So I just wanted to tweak what you said.
That's a very important tweak. And now you're getting into where I feel undereducated. So how do we then think through that?
Before I go there, I want to say, and also here's the other advice. And maybe we're all wrong. Maybe there's nothing to worry about. Okay. So how do I deal with that? Like what this guy Dalio is saying is very crazy, and who knows whether he's right or wrong, and he's been wrong in the past, and who knows if it's right, and simultaneously. So okay, that's exactly what you said is the way pretty much I look at it. What you said, and if I was to paint the world, I painted the world the way I did. Okay, and I have those questions, and then beyond that, I say you as an individual should think about the total safety, including maybe that terrible scenario doesn't happen. Okay, that's what I'd like you to do. That's what I'd like you to do. And if you do that, you will come to a better balanced position. I want you to get balance. Okay. I want you to do certain things. I want you to have enough savings, whatever, to have security, to build the first level of, I think investing, which is the same as savings, comes in tiers. tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 on risk. And the first tier is if everything goes wrong, I'm okay. And everything could be inflation, depression, anything, whatever it is. I lose my job. I whatever it is, I got that thing covered. Then your next level is, okay, what am I going to get the highest returns? What is my best bet? Okay, but start at that level. And then you said the other thing too, that it's not just the investment, it's where am I? Am I in the middle of a fight? Like, I don't want to be in the middle of a fight. Okay, what's it going to be like? So it does have geographic implications. I don't know, maybe it's the state or the state you go to or the city you go to or the country you go to or whatever it is, and there are certain things you can do to say this one's going to be better than that one. Let me give you an example of that. There are 3 things you could do based on these 3 influences. Are you going to be in a place and around people and circumstances that are financially strong? In other words, the income better, are they earning more than they're spending, and they have a good balance sheet? Because that means stability. If you can go through that, then you have stability. Places that are like that are better off. Number 2, do they have internal conflict? Country, place, and is it a hospitable environment for me? Okay, that's the second. And then third, are they in the risk of an international war? I don't want to be where the fighting is. I really don't. I don't want to be safe and stable and so on. So this is a time for looking for such things.
Yeah. Okay. While deeply
guys,
unnerving,
stable India is in everyone's interest, and which is why Ankit Shah is saying that election interference to kick away Modi is not going to happen anytime soon, because everyone needs India in a stable corner here, to whether as a mediator or whether for dumping their worthless dollars or their assets or new business ventures where the crowd can manufacture and buy at the same time. There's a big population, etc., and there is believable banking structures in place. No one trusts the bookkeeping in China. But one thing I wanted to respond to Ninar is, Ninar, so since I'm not an expert here, I will just quote to you what Ankit Shah's counter-argument here is in this situation, that you are saying that I don't understand what produce India will give to the world in exchange for reserve. We don't even produce things like China. Remember, the argument here from Ankit Shah is that America did not really become the manufacturing hub of the world to become the reserve currency for the entire world, right? Whereas China, who was the manufacturing hub of the entire world, still they could not achieve reserve currency status. Okay, their GDP is probably $13 trillion even now, whereas USA is going on printing. Okay, so it's not going to be entirely dependent just on manufacturing. It's going to be dependent a lot on narratives and stuff, unfortunately, as well. What's the perceived stature?
I think incredibly important to think through that. Let's talk about diversification, doing that well. You talk about uncorrelated assets. And I don't know how much you talk about this publicly, but I'd love to understand. It seemed like for people that don't know your background, you have a meteoric rise. You're in your 30s, on top of the world, unbelievable success. You make a huge bet on something, to your point earlier about have the humility to know that you may be wrong. You made a huge bet on a collapse, and it didn't play out. And it ended up that the market went up and you lost a lot of money, almost lose Bridgewater, managed to keep it together. You come up with a new strategy that I believe is known as pure alpha. It ends up getting tested multiple times in the market, and you guys crush.
Yes, and they have handicapped themselves in the foot by not using their fossil fuels, which is why Vivek is saying that we have to grow at 4% again. We have to drill, frack, and burn coal. Without that, that's not going to happen. We are going to go on basically having this 1%, 1.5% growth rate without that, without using those natural resources. So now, in terms of natural resources, Russia is going to get a lot of natural resources when the Arctic ice melts, I guess. So by 2030, which is going to happen. America did not become manufacturing hub, but they had most amount of gold in reserve and oil trade happening in dollars. That's how it became standard currency. And we have gold now as well. India should focus both on manufacturing and narrative. Yes, that's what the government is doing. But internal conflicts and stable government is the need of the hour.
Other people struggle, which leads you to be, for people that don't know, the largest hedge fund.
We made money in 28 of the last 32 years. We never had a really bad year. We made, I think it was during my time there, running at 11.8% a year with the worst year being, I think it was down, I don't know, 10 or 12% sort of thing, and the next worth year being like down 1%, and we did that by simultaneously looking for opportunities and looking for good returning assets that were not correlated. Diversification of good, and just as you point out, what happened was, and by the way, those returns are not correlated with the stock market or whatever. So they were stock market, bond market, they're uncorrelated. So they were effective diversifiers in portfolios, which almost all go up and down together. And this was diversification. And so it was loved by investors, institutional investors, and so on. And the thing, and as you point out, what I learned from, basically this punch in the face mistake, this painful mistake, is I learned how to make good money without having big losses. I learned how to improve my return relative to my risk. And I learned that the holy grail of investing is 10 or 15 good, uncorrelated return streams. Like, you get that and you will, have a similar path to the path I've been fortunate enough to have. And so that's what I want to pass along to people, you go into the COVID year, the one year that we lost, it's 10 to 13% or something, was 2022 because COVID came along. I didn't have COVID in our system. We had other things. So that was it. And so there's, something comes along all the time for anything. Everything has its time. And so you put your money in any one thing. You could think, movie theaters are good, and then you get COVID, or cruise lines are good, and then you get COVID, and or whatever it is good. Well, it's good sometimes, but there's always something that always is going to mess up the one thing. So you don't want, in my opinion, you don't want more than 10% of your money in anything, and you want, probably you don't want more than 7.5% of your money in anything, and they want to be good different things, and that's the message I'm trying to convey.
Right now, one of the things that has me the most unnerved is the attack on the dollar. So you've got the BRICS nations.
Attack on the dollar, okay. And one thing I wanted to respond to here is that the personal gold. That is why Narendra Modi had tried doing that gold monetization scheme, which people didn't really want to do. If he can again try it and people really do it, and if people he can convince people, then if the gold monetization scheme happens, then it will be fun again. But interestingly, USA, who has 8,000 tons of gold, Canada has 0 tons of gold. Okay, Canada पूरा खाली हाथ में लेके बैठा है.
For people that haven't heard that acronym before, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are getting together. And I know this has been going on for quite some time, so I don't know if I should be overly paranoid about that in this moment or not. But again, going back to those indicators that point to a transition from phase 5 to phase 6, do you think there's anything that we can prepare for as we look at the big cycle, as we see this particular moment with the assault on the dollar? Is there anything in the big cycle that can educate us on how to deal with this moment?
Just all happens over and over. The decline of the British pound as a reserve currency. Before that, the decline of the Dutch guilder as a reserve currency, all happened for the same reasons, which is, two things are going on. First of all, they're holding all of this dollars, and the stuff that we talked about is going on. And then also there's the weaponization through sanctions of the dollar. In other words, the United States' greatest weapon to use, as distinct from its military weapon, is sanctions. And so sanctions mean you freeze other assets, you freeze assets. Those assets are the bonds. And so that happened with Russia, and there are threats of it with other countries, China, and so on. And there's kind of the thinking, well, if I hold the bonds, can that happen to me? And then why am I transacting?
Great points, guys. I want to respond to this. So Canada does have tons of unexplored gold mines. Here the problem is that Canada का जो liberal arts और environmentalism का जो चुतियापा है, ये लोग तो अब mining करने नहीं देंगे. या फिर in the near future, as Ankit Shah predicts, USA, Canada, these countries will have to screw their environment. They will have to mine, which is what Vivek is saying anyway. Vivek is also saying we need to peg the dollar to something finite. We need to de-dollarize. We need to devalue the currency in order to be competitive in the world. And Vivek is also saying that we need to drill, frack, and burn coal. Exactly what Vivek is saying, Ankit Shah is in line with it. Balaji Srinivasan, Ray Dalio, Peter Schiff, okay. Now, therefore, Ankit Shah's one of his other predictions is that Texas, Florida will be the next disastrous cities like San Francisco and New York, because you need illegal immigrants to do so much mining. क्योंकि तुम्हारा minimum wage law तो तुम change नहीं करोगे, वोट में हार जाओगे इसलिए. या फिर ऐसा भी होगा कि डेमोक्रेसी का जो ये एक्सपेरिमेंट था कुछ सालों का, कुछ डेकेड्स का, या फिर कुछ सेंचुरीज का, ये गया. डेमोक्रेसी का चुतियापा अब खत्म, क्योंकि कोई भी देश ये रिस्क नहीं लेगा कि डेमोक्रेसी के नाम पे हम इतना इंस्टेबिलिटी कर दें, जबकि अभी एक ट्यूमुल्चुअस पीरियड आ रहा है। ओके, तो टेक्सास में बहुत बहुत सारा तेल है, तो फ्लोरिडा में भी ऑफशोर ड्रिलिंग करके ऐसा कुछ मिल भी जाएगा, या फिर बहुत सारा फैक्ट्रीज करना पड़ेगा जहाँ पे सबके सब इलीगल इमिग्रेंट्स काम करेंगे, तो उनका सोसाइटी तो छोड़ ही दो, एनवायरनमेंट भी पूरा गड्ढे में जाने वाला है। एंड इफ अगेन कनाडा ऑल्सो स्टार्ट्स लुकिंग फॉर गोल्ड इन इट्स माइंस, तो हो गया उसका सोसाइटी का।
In this other third currency rather than transacting directly. So, for example, the United States share of world trade has declined, and China's share of world trade has increased to become greater. And if two countries are trading, let's say Saudi Arabia is trading with China, why do they why do they go to the dollars in order to do that? No good reason to go to the dollars, and they don't know. Then they're worried about holding the dollars because they might get sanctioned, and so you see more of those transactions taking place in other currencies, and then the usefulness of the dollar as a storehold of wealth changes. It's like, think about it in
that stature of dollar changes. Okay, you all are saying something which I agree with here, that we should actually make everything high quality goods, cheap bullshit quality, and mid quality. But I don't understand this part, why Ankit Shah says that we should be now focused on, or India will probably focus on making only the elite premium quality products for the entire world, which USA was doing. I don't know why that should be done. I think we should make every kinds of products.
The most fundamental way. Everybody wants...
Very important point, Rakshit, that India's environment is also going to be fucked big time now, okay? Which is why I'm saying that I hope some big innovation happens even in the environmental conservation sector as well. Waste management, industrial waste management sectors as well. We need big innovations now. I think huge government funding should be given to these people.
A medium of exchange and a storehold of wealth. So in other words, if everybody's using the dollar in world trade, then you want to save in dollars, because you say, okay, now that's the thing I spend in, and I save in the dollars. But over time, as the share of world trade goes down, why aren't they denominating in like China has a larger share of world trade. Traditionally, the countries that have the world's reserve currency have the largest share of world trade and the largest share of world capital flows. And because the United States has declined, and also there's a worry about that, holding it because of sanctions. I mean, just imagine how the Chinese must feel about having a lot of money in treasury bonds. Like, I would be worried that I would be treated like Russia would be treated. It's not something I would want to hold as
right.
A safe asset. And other countries who might feel that they can get sanctioned, and for all those reasons, they're less inclined to hold. And when we call dollars, what we're really calling is dollar debt, because you don't hold, you hold dollar debt. And that's what is a debt? It's a promise to receive currency. So, okay, so now getting out of those things and transacting in other currencies seems to be the safer thing to do for those countries. And so that's the dynamic that's taking place. So it's not an attack on the dollar. It's like, I don't want to hold those things. And so very similar to on the British pound, what happened is the British had the war, and they were the most powerful empire ever in the world. And they had World War II, and they came out of World War II financially in debt, a lot of debt. And who held the debt? All these countries held the debt because that was the residual from that. But they had a problem. They had a debt problem. And so they needed to print more money because there was too much of a squeeze. And then so it deteriorated, and then they sort of said, please hold my debt, please hold my debt. They went to Commonwealth countries, part of those that were in the former British Empire.
Yeah.
And then you had the Suez Canal incident, where there's sort of a war, and everybody realizes, well, hey, wait a second, that British Empire ain't the British Empire, and they're heavily in debt. And then they say, I don't want to own that debt. And there went the British pound. So that's just how the mechanics work.
Okay.
So
great point, Ninar, that I want to respond to. That Dada, do you believe in the Sanatan economics he makes claims on? He never outlined its principles. I had been wondering about this as well, and he's basically going to flesh it out in his next book, which is called Sanatan Economics. But because of this, I sent him my article on Sanatani libertarianism, which I wrote before I heard his name. And he said that, yeah, it's a good write-up, which was not very technical. It was basically a layman's understanding of economics and how we can imbibe some Arthashastra Chanakyan principles into it. So what I've understood so far Sanatan economics to be is the internal consumption model, okay, where you don't have to deal with the entire world and depend so much on exports, etc. And by depending on exports, becoming manufacturing hub means destroying your economy and breaking the backs of your working class. Abhi to what we are doing is breaking the backs of our middle class. China has broken the backs of its lower class. So if you keep breaking the backs of one of your classes, then the country keeps being a hugely troublesome place anyway. So, and our lower class is the biggest population. So if we try to break their backs, the country is going to absolutely go to hell anyway. So Sanatan economics is kind of what Ram Mandir is doing. So let's say very small specific example. Let's say you are a flower seller. Someone is a flower grower. You use the flower in your local temple here.
So looking at the U.S. and I don't want to be cheeky and say speaking directly to the U.S. government, but if I were to be so bold, so if this is that predictable moment where, okay, there are actions that we can take as a country that will either help us keep the world reserve currency status, and there are actions that we can take that will cause us to lose that status more quickly. It seems like, okay, you've got the BRICS nations. They are moving away from the dollar. It seems like that card has already been played. I don't know if you think there's anything that we can do to make that easier. But certainly, speaking to printing, so one thing that I've heard recently, and this is a really fascinating concept, that when you have other nations that are holding your currency, holding debt, as you said, they're not like hoarding cash, but they're holding a lot of debt. If we print money, what we're essentially doing is externalizing inflation. So we are causing a devaluation of that debt.
Did you hear what he just said? Externalizing inflation. हमारा inflation हमने अपना तो मार ही दिया. अब हम बाकियों को लेके डूबेंगे.
Countries that hold us. Now we're in a moment with rising interest rates that's causing us to need to print, but creating this really weird, difficult moment where as we print, then we have a need to raise interest rates. But the reason we're having to print is because we're raising interest rates. So it's a very difficult moment. But if we could, going back to your idea, it's how we are with each other. If we could get people to come together in the middle, would one of the things we would want to convince the US government to do is to be very cautious about devaluing the dollar? Is that an important idea?
It's more basic than that, and it's more simple, but it's also more difficult. What the reason cycles exist is that the next stage has been determined by what has already happened in the prior stage. So we are in debt a lot. You can't change that. We got a lot of debt. And if you say, what could you do? I mean, two things come to mind. What you could do is you could be financially strong, and you can not use financial sanctions as a weapon to scare the holders of those bonds. But to be financially strong requires you to not spend more than you earn. That means you either have to cut your spending or raise your earnings. Okay, that ain't easy. Okay. So are we going to cut our spending? Okay, now you look at it. What are you going to, infrastructure programs, I don't know, poverty transfers, defense spending. Okay, what are we going to cut? The world, governments have the same basic economics as people, except for the fact that they can take money from one person and give it to another, and they can print money. That's it. And so when you look at this, okay, you have that gap. You can eliminate the gap by taking money from some and eliminating another and not spending much. Okay, that's not easy, right? Okay, what are you going to... Most governments now don't think, how much money do I have to spend, and then how do I prioritize that? They think, I need to spend on this, I need to spend on that, and I need to spend on that, and they spend on it, and then they either produce a deficit, and then you either have to pay it back with hard money or printed money, and that's the situation. So when you say, what could we do? Well, you've got to get financially strong in a politically fragmented environment in which everybody wants more, and you have to, be a higher percentage of world trade so that everybody wants to use your currency, and and not threaten the holders of that bonds with freezing their assets.
It it's a tall order in this moment. It has become so clear to me in the last month since you and I saw each other, how important, the reason that you keep coming back to it all comes down to how people treat each other. So in this moment, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but it does feel like the die is cast a little bit. I don't see how we pull ourselves back from the precipice because, to your point about being fiscally responsible, like we'd have to get into a position where we're making more than we spend. I want to circle around to something. As you were talking, you mentioned infrastructure, and it got me thinking about, okay, what are things that we would need to go right? So I think everybody is aware, and I've heard you.
Guys, what M. Shastri is saying here, that so investing in pilgrimages and temple economy also creates growth, yes. And then Abhay said that India should focus on tourism and pilgrimage economy too. Now here the problem is that for hills it's a completely different thing, Uttarakhand etc. That it's people are destroying the place by throwing plastic packets etc. वो तो है, मगर इतने लोग अगर जाएंगे तो उनका वेस्ट मैनेजमेंट फिर से कैसे होगा? उसके लिए कुछ इनोवेशन तो चाहिए, या फिर some stricter policy, or if we discourage people from going there again, that place's environment will be saved, but the economy will be of course worse. So for hills which are so delicate, there I think we can make this trade-off. But in terms of temple tourism or temple, let's say this corridor idea, which is about to happen in Kamakhya temple as well, and what has happened already in UP. Now there the problem is that the trad argument is going to be tough to justify. That it should not be just about tourism, it should be bhakti, and it should not be like archeo tourism etc. You see, who goes there for what? You can't really regulate that anymore, because theoretically पहली बात तो ये है कि तू वो टेम्पल देखने जा रहा है या राम का पूजा करने के लिए जा रहा है, ये तुम कभी भी डिसाइड नहीं कर पाओगे, उसके बेसिस पे तुम किसी को रोक भी नहीं पाओगे. Secondly, the idea that तीर्थ क्षेत्रस were supposed to be a tough thing to achieve, okay? बहुत कष्ट उठाना पड़ता है वहाँ पे जाने के लिए. वो कष्ट तो आज वैसे भी नहीं होगा. टेक्नोलॉजी का इनोवेशन आज जैसा हो गया है, एक वर्ल्ड व्यू जैसा हो गया है, जिस रूल्स के हिसाब से हम खेल रहे हैं ये गेम, उस हिसाब से तो तब गाड़ी वाड़ी भी बंद कर दो वहाँ पे, तो तब प्रॉपरली तीर्थ होगा. बट द अदर फैक्टर इज इफ यू डोंट डू दिस कॉरिडोर्स, तब क्या होता है, ये द स्टैम्पेड्स इन रिलीजियस प्लेसेस इन इंडिया इज सो कॉमन. डू यू वांट दो स्टैम्पेड्स टू गो ऑन? आई एम आस्किंग द ट्रैड्स हियर. तो if we have to save the pilgrims even, not the nashedi gajedi people who are visiting temple towns. I'm talking about the real devotees. Thousands, lakhs of people have died repeatedly because of stampedes. Those stampedes cannot be afforded anymore. Okay, it should not be allowed. उसके लिए we need corridors. उसके लिए जो क्षेत्र का change करना है. And I don't think anyone's going to listen to Rajarshi Nandi's petition that he has started. It's a very well written, it's a very nicely and humbly written petition that please don't change the area around Kamakhya temple to build a Kamakhya corridor. But it has to happen, guys. पहली बात तो ये है, ये टेम्पल इकोनॉमी इंटरनल कंजम्पशन के लिए इंपॉर्टेंट है, बट ऑल्सो फॉर द सेफ्टी ऑफ द डिवोटीज, बिकॉज यू आर नॉट गोइंग टू बी एबल टू एक्सप्लेन टू एनीवन दैट इट्स सपोज टू बी अ डिफिकल्ट स्पॉट टू गो. डोंट गो देयर, और इफ यू गो देयर ओनली गो देयर बिकॉज ऑफ योर भक्ति भाव. ये एक्सप्लेनेशन अब तो नहीं होगा. वैसे भी लोगों का भक्ति भाव भी इंक्रीज हो रहा है बिकॉज ऑफ द अवेकनिंग ऑफ Hindu consciousness, to be very specific. But also you can't keep it deliberately tough, and it can't be unsafe at all. We can't afford to do that anymore. ये stampedes बंद होना है. So many stampedes have happened over the years. बार. Okay, thin skinny roads, electric wires hanging here and there, mountains, and then people get killed. ये चुतियावा बंद करना है, उसके लिए corridors चाहिए.
You say that there are changes that are going to need to be made to capitalism in order to bring back a thriving middle class, and the importance of the thriving middle class. And you've defined the things, again, staying to the theme of principles here, of the three things that we need to do to be strong as a country, or for any country to be strong. And you said 2 parents in the home, great public education, and then equal opportunity. Where do you see us on those? Are we moving in the right direction, moving in the wrong direction?
Well, again, maybe I aspire too much to 2 parents in the home. It's certainly better if you have 2 loving parents raising a family. That's good, but maybe that's too much to ask for. But in other words, good parental guidance. Okay, you're raised well, you're educated well. You can go to a public school that educates you well, and you have good guidance, so you're well raised in a healthy environment. And not only do you learn, skills and all that, but you learn how to behave well with each other. So you learn civility, and so you come out capable and civil to a land of opportunity in which you can, work and have a good environment. And really, that's all you need if a society does
See,
that.
be
Right?
civil and all. This is what Ankit Shah interprets as that everyone will have to, by default, without knowing it or calling it or not, people will have to go back to Sanatan values, etc. And here I want to respond to some two important comments. So yeah, Ninad is saying Kamakya is a hill area, but you see, it's not that of a vulnerable and gigantic mountain like the Uttarakhand Kedarnath. Those areas are a different question. Kamakya is just a small tila. Okay, it's not a very vulnerable position. I have been there, and whatever corridor is going to be built, it's going to be built for safety, and it's not like that corridor is now going to lead to the entire destruction of the entire mountain, and the mountain is going to come crashing down. वैसा नहीं है कामाख्या का situation. And the other thing is judicial reforms. अरे बाप रे, ये संजीव सान्याल, एक बात याद रखो, संजीव सान्याल जब भी कोई पेपर लिख रहा है ये बोल के कि देखो ये चीज़ ना गलत हो रहा है गवर्नमेंट में, इसका मतलब ये है कि मोदी खुद उसको बोल रहा है कि तुम ये बात छेड़ दो, पब्लिक में डिबेट हो, ताकि इसका डिमांड हो जाए, और फिर उस डिमांड की वजह से हम ये किसी के मुंह पे ठोस दे. अभी वी विल शव इट डाउन सम डिपार्टमेंट्स थ्रोट बिकॉज now the public consensus is there. So Sandeep Sanyal is going on talking about judicial reforms since 2017. I think the time is ripe. Sometime soon some reform will happen. This slow judicial enforcement of contracts fucking thing cannot be done anymore. And actually I know the government has started some things using AI to solve at least the minor cases, etc. The other thing I wanted to respond is Honeyman is saying, what is your opinion on anti-men films which promote extramarital affairs and say women should not wear sindoor? Personally, I think women should not be forced, but promoting and showing is it okay? It's not okay, but this is a big disaster also. See, the people who are good at filmmaking, music, etc., all of them are commies because of the nature of how art has been viewed in our society for the last few decades, last 100 years or so. For example, in Bengal, all the best directors, best composers, everyone is a commie, okay? And all the right wingers are absolute insane directors. If you watch their movies, you'll bleed from your eyes, okay? For example, the very best composer in Tollywood is Indradeep Dasgupta, okay? He is the person who said that Sardar Udham should not be sent to the Oscars because it breeds hatred for British. Okay, ऐसे लोगों को लेकर हम बैठे हैं, तो ये कैसे चेंज होगा मुझे पता नहीं है भाई, other than incentive structures and a change in the government कि नहीं भाई ये पैसा मिलेगा, यही बनाओ, ये मूवी बनाओ. देखो आजकल देखो कितना हिंदू भाव है, तुम जो लोग जो अच्छे कॉमेडी डायरेक्टर्स हो, अब हिंदू टॉपिक पे मूवी बनाओ और फैमिली वैल्यूज पे मूवी बनाओ.
And I think where the things that are going on. Education in a lot of public education is deteriorating. It's a real problem. My wife works to help the poorest school districts, the poorest people in the state of Connecticut, and the state of Connecticut it's always 1, 2, or 3 in terms of the highest per capita income.
The truth is, hitting your career goals is not easy. You have to be willing to go the extra mile to stand out and do hard things better than anybody else. But there are 10 steps I want to take you through that will 100x your odds to dominate. And you can download
Connecticut as of last
description. All right, my friend, back to today's episode.
And in the state of Connecticut, as of the last survey, 22% of the high school students have either dropped out of high school,
Whoa,
or have absentee rates which are greater than 25% and are failing classes. So they're living in areas that don't have the things I'm talking about parents' nutrition and so on. And there's not adequate resources for them. For example, during COVID, we found that 60,000 students didn't have computers or connectivity to take classes, and the government wasn't going to provide it. So philanthropically, we bought 60,000 computers and give it to the kids, but we can't do that. So our society is, when you look at this, you see drug problems. You see how the cities are changing. The cleanliness of the cities, the education levels of the cities, mental illness, crimes, and so on.
Okay, guys, the rest of the video for a long time is going to be just about how US's society has gone to hell culturally, okay? So we are going to skip it here and go to Peter Schiff now, where there again is going to be very well explained, direct technical points about why US's economy is going to hell.
a lot of people say, oh, we're leaving all this debt to our grandkids. The grandkids don't have to pay it. I mean, they can leave. People used to ask me, where do you stand on the wall? And the main reason I was against it is I said, if we build that wall, it can be used to keep the Americans in. There's no way out, until there's a violent revolution.
During periods of extreme economic uncertainty, like the one that we're living through right now, I really think it's incumbent upon
Peter Schiff was against the building of the southern wall in USA because he said it will be used to keep Americans in America, whereas a situation might arise where Americans might need to escape to Mexico.
all of us as individuals to face the situation head on and develop a thesis for how to navigate that kind of period well. But most people get overwhelmed and they shut down. Do not let that be you. The intelligent path forward is always a combination of information and action. To that end, I bring you Peter Schiff, the man who believes the economy is headed towards a cliff, but has a plan for how we get off the bus before the inevitable crash. Are we headed towards a recession that's going to be worse than 2008?
I think so. In fact, I think we're actually in recession, although by the time they write the history books on this era, it may be considered a depression. I think that the numbers that we get from the government are not accurate by design. So I don't really think that the economy is growing in any real sense. I think that the way they compute the numbers, I think, is deceiving. I think that for most Americans, their standard of living is declining. I don't think the economy is really getting bigger. I think we're spending more and we're borrowing more and going deeper into debt. We're paying more for everything we buy. And a lot of that consumption ends up feeding into the GDP. And so we get a bigger GDP number and we think, oh, that means the economy is growing.
Yeah.
But I think it's all being distorted by the inflation and the debt.
Right.
Meanwhile, individuals that are living in the economy are struggling. Their cost of living is going up. You have a record increase in the number of people holding multiple jobs, not just 2 jobs, but 3 jobs or more. And they still can't make ends meet. You've got record credit card debt, which is now over $1 trillion. First time ever. And we almost have $2 trillion in student loan debt. I mean, that has just exploded. And all sorts of debt. If we really had a growing economy, people would be getting out of debt. Right? That's what happens when you're doing well. You pay off your debt. You build up your savings. The savings rate has collapsed in the last couple of years. That's not a sign of economic strength. That's desperation. People are tapping into whatever savings they have left just to make ends meet. If you look at Joe Biden's popularity, he's as unpopular as any sitting president since Jimmy Carter. Wow. So, that's quite a feat. But if you remember, when Jimmy Carter was president, things were pretty bad, right? You had, the misery index, high inflation, high interest rates, high unemployment. You have to go back to that time period to find an incumbent president this unpopular. So what does that tell you? Because normally, you vote your pocketbook. If the economy were really strong, voters wouldn't care if Biden was falling asleep at meetings or couldn't remember who he was married to or where he was giving his speech. If people were feeling good about themselves and their economy, they would credit Joe Biden. The fact that he's so unpopular is more a function of how bad the economy is. And no matter how much he wants to pretend that it's doing well, the poll numbers display the opposite. And so does everything else with economic reality. I mean, we have record budget deficits. If times were good, the government would be running smaller deficits. They would be collecting more taxes. They wouldn't be spending as much on government assistance. Our trade deficits are at record highs. If we had a booming economy, we'd be making more stuff. We'd be exporting that stuff.
Making more stuff the USA nahi kar raha hai. Satyajay Behuria has asked a very important question. In India, garbage management is non-existent almost. I would say almost, not entirely. And majority of Indians lack civic sense. How this can be changed? Yeah, guys. It has been the result of a long centuries of dehumanization process where people have stopped giving a shit about the locality they live in. But this can be changed with 3 things. Civil society narratives, because of films, web series, etc., where subtly here and there you show characters about to throw something but not throwing something on the roads, etc. Not make an entire movie with Akshay Kumar as a message, social message wala movie about not throwing garbage on the streets. वैसे नहीं होगा. It has to be subtly messaged in each and every fucking movie. The directive has to come from the government, so that please involve this narrative in your films, that it's so great to have clean roads and how to keep them clean, okay? So that a certain conscious awakening happens in the people themselves, and it sort of becomes an aspirational model amongst the youth that why should we throw that? It looks so nice. Let's not throw there. Second upay is the government narrative that they are pushing with their Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, etc., that they are showing that Narendra Modi is going around cleaning the streets, etc. That is also important. It will help people keep things in mind. Third is what Abhay is saying, stringent regulations as well. कि अगर कहीं पे कोई दिख जाए कि कुछ फेंक रहा है रास्ते पे, तब उसका माँ बहन कर दो. But the problem is that now we are in such a situation that the opposition is completely anti-India. Because the last कुछ सालों से train accidents had decreased so much. It has increased so much suddenly in the last few months because of the elections. सब जहाँ पे पत्थरबाज लोग रेल के पटरी पे पत्थर रख रहे हैं ताकि रेल का माँ बहन हो जाए. ओके, ऐसे चूती अगर भरे होंगे तो ये थोड़ा एक्स्ट्रा प्रॉब्लम है. तो उसके वजह से क्या होगा कि अब इंडिया का नाम खराब करने के लिए, बीजेपी का नाम खराब करने के लिए वैसे ही लोग पैकेट फेंकेंगे रास्ते पे. तो कुछ स्ट्रिंजेंट लॉज भी काम आएंगे.
Or we'd be importing less because we would just consume what we produced ourselves. But our economy is really shrinking. And that's why we're on life support. We're dependent on foreigners for all the goods that we can't produce.
You know, ancestors promoted pan, but see, पहली बात तो जो लोग घर में पान लेते थे उनको तो वो थूकने का एक प्लेट वेट दिया जाता था. But Chanakya was also very, very, very tough on hygiene and street hygiene, etc. Okay, those sorts of things can be done again. So Chanakya was also very worried about this.
And we have to pay for it on credit because we don't have the real incomes or the savings to afford it.
So I think that answer is going to be jarring for people because for a lot of them, things seem fine. In fact, one thing that I've heard people criticize you for is you've been saying for years now that we're going to get hyperinflation, but it hasn't come yet. And I think a lot of people are going to say depression. We're not in a depression yet, for sure. So the economy works in a certain way. There are physics to it. So what is it that you see that makes a recession or depression either happening now or inevitable? What do you see that they're missing?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think we're in a depression now as far as the economic conditions. I said that by the time the historians look back on this time period, this could be the beginning of that depression, because I think the depression is in our future, really not in our past. And the way we've been kind of holding back the tides of depression is through debt and inflation. And so we've been, kicking the can down the road, but we're really sowing the seeds of the future depression that I believe the time period we're in now will just be lumped in with it, right? Not like this is the earlier stages of that prolonged period that is really going to coincide with, having to come to terms with all the mistakes that we've made in the past. It's like the chickens coming home to roost because of bad monetary and fiscal policy that go back, for decades. We're in a huge hole. And it isn't going to be easy to get out of it. And the time period where we're going to get out of it, that's, it's going to be hard times. And the government is in a position to make those times a lot harder. So, that's a wild card as to how the government is going to react to this unfolding crisis and how much worse they might make it be. Now, as far as hyperinflation, yeah, I was talking about a hyperinflation scenario back in, the early days of the 2008 financial crisis, based on the way the government reacted to that with quantitative easing. And I knew that the road that we were going down could lead to hyperinflation. Now, I always said that that was a worst case scenario. I never said, hey, it's for sure. But of course, the media, everybody picks up on my warnings of hyperinflation. I still think that hasn't been taken off the table. And the odds of that are actually greater now than they were when I first started warning about it. But I always said that, look, that's the worst case scenario. You destroy your currency completely, where you're talking Weimar Republic, Zimbabwe. But what I did say was inevitable was
These are the countries with hyperinflation, okay? For meaning that, let's say you are trying to print a 5 rupee note, वो print करने के लिए 10 रुपए खर्च हो रहा है. ऐसा inflation हो गया है.
High inflation. And we've just started to experience that in recent years. And I don't think that's over. I mean, I think we're going to see higher inflation. Right now, the high watermark for year-over-year CPI was just over 9%. That's not going to cap this. We're going to go into the double digits. And the first digit might not be a 1. That still wouldn't be hyperinflation, right? If we have 20% inflation, that's not hyperinflation, right?
That's curl up in a fetal position and suck your thumb and cry yourself to sleep territory.
It's bad, but also if you compare what we have now, I guess everybody wants to say, look, it's not that bad because look how much worse it was in the 70s where we had inflation 10, 11, 12% for several years. What people don't understand is that you're comparing apples to oranges because the CPI that was in use in the 70s is not the same CPI that we use today.
Hold on one second, because we're going to have to start teasing this apart for people because you have so much knowledge.
CPI is Consumer Price Index, okay?
I think that people don't necessarily understand the physics of the situation. So I want to talk about, you talked about the seeds of the depression. I think inflation is going to be one of those, maybe the most important. And so what I want to talk about is, so you mentioned quantitative easing. So we come into the 2008 financial crisis and not knowing that the government is just going to print its way out of this. I certainly didn't understand what the reaction was going to be. Same thing for me happened when we went into COVID. I didn't understand that the government was going to print their way out of this. Now, what does it mean to quantitatively ease a situation? Why does that become problematic? And am I right that that is the most important seed that sows your destruction in terms of inflation?
Yeah, well, first of all, when they print their way out of a short-term problem, they print their way into an even larger long-term problem, which is what they did. Now, quantitative easing is just a euphemism. It's a better-sounding name for something that's really bad, which is inflation. So quantitative easing is when the government prints money and buys government bonds. Now, that's inflation by definition, by classic definition. Inflation is when you expand the supply of money. How is the money supply expanded? By the purchase of debt. The central bank buys government debt and creates the money to pay for it. That's the mechanism in the United States where the money supply grows. And so that's just inflation. So quantitative easing was inflation. So when Ben Bernanke first launched quantitative easing in 2009 as a way to stimulate the economy, he really said, look, let's create a bunch of inflation to stimulate the economy. Now, he didn't want to say that because if he went out and told the public, our solution to this financial crisis is to create inflation, people would have said, but wait a minute, I don't want inflation. I don't want my cost of living to go up. That doesn't sound like a good solution. Is that all you got? You got something else? So if basically they dress it up and they say, no, what we're doing is quantitative easing. See, that doesn't sound so bad. Right? And so that's how they got the public to swallow more inflation, is that they wrapped it up in the trappings of quantitative easing. But that's all it was. Now, the reason that we didn't get real big increases in the CPI until really after COVID was that there were a lot of forces in the economy at that time that were pushing prices down.
Yeah.
And had the government not unleashed all this inflation, we would have seen prices fall. I mean, they never actually fell during any year, but had the government not done that, I'm pretty sure that prices would have gone down and the cost of living would have been lower. Now, a lot of these politicians or Keynesian economists say that's terrible. Oh, that's deflation. That's really a bad deal. We don't want that. That's BS. If prices go down, that is good for the consumer. That provides relief because now the cost of living is lower. You don't need as much money to buy food. You don't need as much money to buy energy. You have more money left over to buy other things. You don't have to go into debt to pay for things. And falling prices is even good for business. As long as their costs are falling in line with their prices, they maintain their margins, and now they can sell more. They make it up on volume because when prices are lower, their customers can buy more stuff. So everybody wins from falling prices, but the government doesn't want that. And so it was able to stop that by unleashing inflation.
Can I say it a different way? I want to see if I'm understanding this right. The following statement would be true. The government actually does want falling prices because they want to tax that falling price in the form of inflation.
Yes, Tatti ko wrapper pehna diya. And that is what USA is extremely good at. Selling things by naming this something, selling something bad by naming it something great. Affirmative action. Okay. Affirmative. It's such a positive thing. Why wouldn't you do it? तुम क्या negative action चाहते हो? Affirmative action तो अच्छा है. हमने बोला reservation, उन्होंने नाम दिया affirmative action. America is a wealthy country because they have a cheat code they can print, yes, and the world will accept it, and no other country on earth can follow,
But if they don't have the falling prices, when they do inflation, people will really feel it. So, for instance, if prices...
Actually, what you are saying isn't it actually happening? If you notice it more closely, that you are waiting for USA to start producing Satyajit Ray style films about their society, kitna garib hai. See, the number of movies and web series they make about a dark future, dystopian future ka movie bana ke khatam kar diya hai. There is no movie these days about a bright, great future, right? It's all about the society is going to hell, civil war, dystopian future, environmental disasters. इसी पे सारे movies बन रहे हैं, है ना? Unless it's about some other completely different topic, etc. But it's all about bad things, and it has kind of started after 9/11 basically. इतना जो shock और trauma लगा उन लोगों को, उसके बाद से ही उन्होंने वो Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone जैसे positive movies बनाना बंद कर दिए.
Were actually going down by 2%. They inflate by 3%. They now get 5% inflation, but I only feel 3% of it. So now, as the government, I'm able to really take advantage of those falling prices.
You hit the nail on the head, and I'm glad that you actually picked up on that, because inflation is a tax. And people just don't realize it because the government blames it on greedy corporations, on Putin, on OPEC, on everybody but themselves. Yeah. But it is a hidden tax. And the easiest way to hide it is if you have a productive economy that otherwise would reduce prices. Because if prices were going to go down, let's say by 5%, and they create 5% inflation so that prices remain the same, nobody realizes how much worse off they are because the government stole something they never had. The free market was going to deliver that benefit, and the government took it. See, what everybody has to understand is...
remember this quote from Thomas Sowell? He says that inflation is basically a hidden tax for you. So what he's pointing out here is that the gain you could have gotten, but didn't get, you don't even know that there was a gain to have had. But that possible gain was taken away by inflation.
Every dime that the government spends must be paid for by the public, one way or another. Now, the traditional way to pay for it is with taxes. The government wants to spend money on the military. They want to spend money, on Social Security or Medicare or whatever they're doing. They need to collect taxes because the government doesn't have any real money because the government doesn't really produce anything. Yeah. It only has the money it takes from the private sector, and then it takes that money from one person and gives it to somebody else. They have to take it first. Well, if they don't take it through taxation, how do they get it? Well, they print it. They sell bonds to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve buys those bonds and puts money into the government's checking account, and then the government just spends that. But when the government spends that money, what it does is it reduces the value of the money that already exists. Yeah. So everybody's paycheck is diminished in value. Everybody's savings are diminished because now prices go up because you have more money in the economy without new production to give that new money value. And that increase in price that is a result of this deficit spending and money printing is basically a tax. But the people don't realize they've been taxed. So the politicians love it because they can pretend that the voter's getting something for nothing because the voter doesn't make the connection between the price hikes. And if the economy is really booming so that prices are dropping, you don't even notice the price hikes. But now the problem is we've created so much money, especially after COVID and all the money we printed there, which was
often... तो एक invisible अनदेखा टैक्स के मजे ले रहे थे गवर्नमेंट्स, मगर अब उसका लिमिट क्रॉस कर चुका है, according to Peter Schiff and Ankit Shah.
Charts, crazy during those years. We now have so much money in the pipeline, and the economy is now being crippled by more regulation and other things that are making it less productive. We're seeing much greater upward pressure on prices. But I tried to make the point earlier is that we would have even seen more movement in the CPI earlier if it wasn't rigged. I started to say that the CPI we had in the 70s is not the same CPI we have now because in the 1990s, they changed it all. They changed the methodology for computing price increases. And their goal was to have a lower CPI because they claimed that the CPI was overstating inflation. And so they decided to fix it. They fixed it, like you would rig, a sporting event. The fix is in. But if you measured the prices...
this is how... this is how Cuba solved its hunger problem, starvation problem. That they said the communist government of Cuba told the hospitals in their government hospitals that you are now, it's illegal to mark starvation as a cause of death. So that's how they proved that, you see, starvation has stopped in Cuba.
We saw the increases in 2021, 2022. If you used the 1970 CPI and then took the prices that we were living through, they were double digit. I mean, we were probably the year that we had 9%, it was probably 18%.
This is what Ankit Shah is also saying. They are in recession today. Recession का definition change कर रहा है हर कुछ महीने बाद. जैसे कि फिर वैक्सीन का ही definition change कर दिया था जब कोरोना में वो पहला वैक्सीन काम नहीं किया यूएसए का.
I mean, that year. God. That was probably...
Listen to this once again.
That was worse that we were living through. They were double digit. You measured the prices that we saw, the increases in 2021, 2022. If you used the 1970 CPI and then took the prices that we were living through, they were double digit. I mean, we were probably the year that we had 9%, it was probably 18%. I mean, that year.
God.
That was worse than any year of the 1970s or early 1980s. That's how bad it was.
All right, so really fast, I want people to understand. So CPI, Consumer Price Index, it's a basket of goods that economists look at and say, these are representative of what things cost. Now, if you change the items in that basket to ones that have gone down or stayed the same, you can make it seem like everything is okay. So you actually can go back and look at what was the 1970s basket of goods that they were using, use that exact same basket and do an apples to apples comparison. Is anybody doing that? Like, can I go somewhere online and see?
Shadow stats. Yeah, they've been doing that for a long time. That's the website. But when they changed that back in the 70s, it was the same basket, and they just said, what did it cost last year, and what does all that exact same stuff cost this year? But now they don't do that. They change the basket. They take stuff out that's gone up. They put stuff in that didn't go up as much. They adjust it for so-called quality improvements. Oh, that's a much higher quality than the one you bought last year, so let's make the price go down. But it's subjective. Is it really better? I mean, and a lot of times the quality goes down. I don't think they ever subtract for falling quality. It's like a one-way street. They just assume everything is getting better, when in many cases, people are substituting lower quality ingredients, or stuff that used to be included. A classic would be airline. People would buy an airline ticket, and they got their seat, they could get food, they could get a pillow, they could get a blanket, they could carry on stuff. Now all of a sudden, all that's extra. It's not part of the airfare anymore. Yeah. You want to pick your own seat? That's extra. You want to check luggage? That's extra. Right. You want a blanket? That costs more.
Bill Maher had a joke about this, that why are there 1,000 fees for everything? Even for a credit card, there's a maintenance fee, there's a this fee, that fee. क्योंकि मेन चीज का प्राइस हम इंक्रीज नहीं कर सकते, बोलेंगे कि तो इविल कैपिटलिस्ट है बोल के, तो उसके ऊपर से अब 25 ये फी वो फी नाम दे दो, और वैसे उस हिसाब से पैसे कलेक्ट करो कंज्यूमर से.
All this stuff now are add-ons. That's not part of the CPI. But I think if you look at some of the other measures, like where the government uses personal consumption expenditures, there you have lots of hedonics, where they just basically say, oh, if a steak gets too expensive, well, we'll just kick out steak and we'll put hamburger in there, because we'll just assume people stop eating steak and they settle for hamburger, and so we can pretend that the price didn't go up. But the quality is going down. I want to eat steak. I can't afford it, and so I'm stuck with hamburger. And according to the government, that means there's no inflation. I mean, by that logic, if I have to give up hamburger and start eating dog food because I can't afford hamburger anymore, as far as the government's concerned, there's no problem, because I'm still eating. But I don't like having to eat dog food. I'd rather eat people food. But this is how the whole thing is rigged. The government, again, they're taxing us through inflation, and so then they're lying to us about how bad it is. And the ultimate irony is, all the years that the Fed was printing all this money, creating all this inflation, they were pointing to a rigged CPI that was less than 2%. And they said, we need it higher. We don't have enough inflation. And that was the justification for continuously creating more inflation, because they theoretically said we need to get up to 2%, when in reality, we were already way above 2%. But there's nothing magical about 2%. 1% is better than 2%. If you have 1%, you don't try to get up to 2%. You try to go down to 0 or negative 1.
Yeah, this is what I was pointing out to the last day's live stream, to that Keralian guy who was saying that 8 to 9% GDP growth rate hai, wo kam ho jayega, because I had said that if de-dollarization happens, then our GDP growth rate will never again be 8-9%, because half of our 8-9% is because of the inflation caused by USA only. But then he said, no. If 5-6% GDP growth rate is happening, that means you are basically apologizing for the government's misdoings. Okay, I could not make him understand, I guess, that 8 to 9% ये arbitrary number के पीछे प्यार कहाँ से आ गया? Why not 15? Why not 20% growth rate? ये 8 to 9% ही क्यों हमेशा के लिए चाहिए? 8 to 9% चाहिए क्योंकि अब हमारा जो इन्फ्लेशन है उससे थोड़ा ज़्यादा है, इसलिए. अगर इन्फ्लेशन ही नहीं होता है उतना, because of not dealing with the dollar, तो हमारा 8-9% GDP growth rate भी उतना necessary नहीं है. तो this is the same thing here, कि 2% CPI ही करना है बोल के. अरे 2% क्यों करना है? Why not 1.5? Why not 1? ये arbitrary एक नंबर बना के उसका भगवान बना दे रहा है.
Prices are better than rising prices. Only an idiot economist or a central banker, or maybe some of these Wall Street people, could believe that rising prices are good, or that prices that go up by 2% every year constitute price stability. That's not stability. That's a continuous increase in price. Stable means the prices don't change.
You can reboot your life, your health, even your career.
I wonder if how much of Raghuram Rajan would agree with this man. What do you all think?
The logic, I know, because this is it's interesting. So I can actually give you the logic, I know, because this is how I used to think of it, as to why people, either there's a natural inclination to believe that 2% makes sense, or that we're brainwashed to believe it. But my thinking used to be around, it's a movement of money thing. Like, you need to get velocity. You need to get people that are spending money. And I actually wrote this down as a question I wanted to ask you. In the research, you ended up answering it, so I know what your punchline is. But my thinking was, well, wait a second. At 2% inflation, you are incentivizing people to spend their money. Now, you can say that that's actually a moral hazard, and that you don't want to incentivize people to spend their money, that you actually want to incentivize them to save it. But if our economy is built around people spending money, then knowing that my money is going to be worth a little bit less a year from now than it is today, it gets me to go in, it sort of greases the wheels and gets people spending money. Now, I know what the punchline is, but just so people hear it, why is that a fallacy? Why is it a fallacy to believe that if prices are going down, that people won't just turn into Scrooge McDuck, storing their money away and freezing up the economy?
So first of all, the fact that we have an economy that is based on spending, that's the problem. That's part of the bubble. We have a bubble economy. A legitimate economy would not be based on spending. It would be based on savings and production. You don't have to encourage people to spend. Everybody wants to spend. I mean, that's how we, gratify ourselves. We want things. Everybody wants stuff, right? And so everybody would spend. I mean, I have young kids. I mean, they would spend constantly if I didn't stop them. I mean, they don't need encouragement. I mean, I have a wife. I don't have to encourage her to spend. I got to do everything I can to stop it, right? So spending doesn't have to be encouraged, right? Because that's delayed gratification. Savings needs to be encouraged. Do without what you want. Don't have it right now. Wait, delay your gratification. So you need to encourage that. And the market does that with interest.
Yeah, some amount of inflation will always happen because after all, new companies will come about. But again, if that internal consumption model comes about and that takes forefront and that takes the supreme position, then again, so much of inflation might not be necessary as it is now. But Rakshit was saying that, yeah, I'm wrong about... So our 8% GDP growth rate is nominal or total? Is it adjusted for inflation?
And other ways of rewarding people for saving. But when interest rates were at zero, and inflation was above zero, we were punishing people for saving. We were punishing people for doing exactly what they need to do. Because what makes a real economy grow is savings, because savings is what finances capital investment. Capital investment is what leads to increasing productivity and higher living standards. So everybody wants to buy. That just comes naturally. We all want stuff, so we don't need to encourage that. But the idea that if prices fall, that people will stop spending and therefore prices need to rise to encourage spending is pure BS. People are going to spend anyway, but they're actually more likely to spend if prices are going down than if prices are going up. And here's why. What these Keynesians try to sell this nonsense, that if I think the price is going to go down, I'm just not going to buy it. I'm going to wait to get it cheaper. And therefore, no one's going to buy because we're all going to be sitting back waiting for a better deal. And that is nonsense. People buy things when they want them. And the proof of that is all around us. Cell phones. The first cell phone was probably $2,000-$3,000. Before they used to be a car phone, but when you finally got a portable phone, if you remember, from Wall Street, Gordon Gekko's got this huge thing, that he's holding by his ear. Those things sold for like $2,000 or $3,000 a piece, and it was very expensive to use them. I remember when I finally got my first cell phone, I never wanted to use it because it was too expensive. I would say, hey, call me on the weekend. I can't talk. I'm on my cell phone. It's too expensive, right? But the reason a lot of people didn't buy the first cell phones is because they were too expensive. They couldn't afford it. The reason everybody has cell phones now is because they're so cheap. The price going down is what motivated more people to buy. You buy things when you can afford them. And if you can't afford the current price, if the price just goes up, well, then you really can't afford it. Same thing, the first television set probably cost the same as an automobile. Who bought the first television set? Some really rich guy. It was a novelty, but it was a gigantic piece of furniture with like a 2-inch screen, and you probably had 2 channels, and you had 2 or 3 hours a day where you could watch it. I mean, it was,
Yeah, Rishabh, that's what he's saying, that it gets cheaper with time because of technological innovations and finding out easier ways to do it. But even then, things are not becoming cheaper because of the value of money going down, not the value of the product itself going down. Okay, and Rakshit is saying that at present, since now it's 6-7%. Oh, then though it's not going to go down 8 or 7-6% anyway, even when de-dollarization happens. And Satya Jayas is saying that, do you think what will happen if government does peg rupees to gold? What will be its repercussions? India alone can't peg its rupee to gold. Everyone else has to do something as well. It has to be a joint effort. But again, slower growth rates.
People bought televisions because they got cheaper. Now, people buy televisions all the time. Everybody knows if I buy a television today, a year from now, I could buy a better one for less money. Everybody knows that, but they buy them anyway. The same thing with a computer or every piece of electronics that you buy. If you just don't buy it and buy it in a year or two, you'll get it cheaper. But people buy them anyway because they want to use them now. Like I remember the first time I saw a high-def television set years and years ago. It was in like a Best Buy or something. I walked in, I saw it, and I was really amazed at the clarity. I mean, to me, it was like looking through a window. I was like, it was because I had never seen high def before until I went into the store. I was just used to the old tubes that we had. And I really liked that television set, but I didn't buy one, even though I liked it and I wanted it, because it was like $10,000 back then. That was, I could have bought a nice car for that. And so I didn't buy it because it was too much money. But some guy that was a lot richer than me, he bought it. And he gave those companies money that they could use to figure out how to make them cheaper. And because the price went down, they're now so cheap, I got those things in every room of my house. And so does everybody else. I mean, you got people now that are living on welfare that got high definition TVs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's because the price came down. If you own a business and you really want to incentivize people to come in and shop, what do? You have a sale. You lower the price. Hey, I'm lowering the price, 10% off, 20% off. Now people, they want to shop. Like, why does everybody come to the stores on Black Friday? Because they lowered the price, not because they raised the price. So it's just complete BS that people will stop spending if prices go down. No. They'll spend more because they can afford to buy more. They'll buy more stuff at lower prices.
Okay. I want to start putting all these pieces together because I never intended to get into financial content, if I'm honest. It was only when COVID kicked off and I got really worried about people that I knew and loved were going to get mowed over. And then the more I got into it, the more I realized that what people think the economy is and what the economy actually is are wildly different, and they're going to massively impact how you move in a time of high uncertainty like what we're living through right now. So I'm going to paint a narrative based on everything I've heard you say and what I know generally about the economy. Let me know if I get this right, because if I get this right, it's A, very worrisome about where we go from here, and B, it will certainly inform how people respond. So the economy seems to be something like this. Over time, innovation is going to drive the price down. The government is always looking for ways to tax people, to give them what they want, because very much the government, certainly the US government in modern times, I will say that, panders to the voters in order to get reelected. They have to get reelected every 2 years, so they want to give them things that feel good in the short term. Everybody's thinking in the economy is very immediate. It's what I want now, and a thing that might happen a year or a decade or 2 decades, I literally couldn't care less. I don't think about that. That doesn't factor into the way that I think of this. So the government goes, okay, cool. There's only so much that I can tax people. And by the way, taxing the 1% literally down to zero, they know won't drive revenues up. And B, they also know that even if they took every last dollar, it just wouldn't cover it. So you end up having to tax the middle class. And so I can't tax the middle class outright. They're not going to feel good about that. I'm not going to get reelected. So what I'm going to do, and I'll even assume that they have good intentions, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use inflation to distribute money more and more evenly around to people. And I'm going to leverage the fact that innovation is driving costs down so that I can get a bigger bite before people feel it. I'm going to train people that 2%, that's a good number, that you actually want 2% inflation. So if costs, and obviously I'm swagging, if costs are going down by 3% and I can get people to believe in 2%, now I can tax 5% every year just on that. And of course, there's still all the other taxes in the world. But I can leverage inflation to do that. Now, where inflation comes from is printing money, period. Now, one thing that I've heard you say, and I guarantee, even though you've touched on it here, people still think what drives inflation is rising costs. When the thing I've heard you say very pointedly is, no, inflation is increasing the money supply, and the echo of that is rising costs.
Yeah,
but
and
rising...
it's pretty fascinating that Tom Dalio did not understand economics even this much, and he runs such a big company. So I'd hate to disrespect a person like Tom Dalio, whom I'm a big fan of. I've gotten so much help because of his podcast. But you see, this is what Ankit Shah says when he says that so much of innovation and so much of things that we think is because of hard work has happened just because of free printing of money. Inflation, Tom Dalio को लगता था अब तक कि अच्छा चीज़ों का दाम बढ़ गया है, इसका मतलब ये इसके वजह से इन्फ्लेशन हो गया. अरे इन्फ्लेशन हुआ है, उतना पैसा घुसाया गया है सिस्टम में जिसके वजह से तुमको लग रहा है कि चीज़ों का दाम बढ़ गया है. ये टॉम डालियो को पता नहीं है, और ये है मिलियनियर, एक कंपनी रन करता है. समझो क्या हाल है यूएसए का.
Cost does not create inflation. It is a symptom of inflating the money supply. Okay, how close are we here?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, they've got the cart before the horse when you're talking about costs causing inflation. And the same thing as prices. Sometimes they say, well, costs go up and that makes prices go up. They talk about the cost price push. But costs and prices are two words for the same thing. I mean, one person's cost is another person's price, right? If I'm a business and I have to buy steel, well, what's my steel cost? Well, the guy that's selling me steel, my cost is the price he charges me. It's his price. It's my cost. So prices and costs are really the same thing. So why are they going up? What's making them go up when a free market would make them come down? That is the beauty of capitalism, is it lowers costs.
In what way? How does it lower costs? Is it through innovation, or is there another mechanism?
Yeah, through increasing productivity. I figure out cheaper ways to make stuff. You build a more productive a mousetrap, so that you can catch more mice for less money. Or the cost of producing a cell phone today is much lower than it was 20 years ago. That's the reason they're so much cheaper. The free market figured out a better way to produce. And they did that because the companies earn money from selling some very expensive cell phones. They take that money, they invest in research and development to figure out more efficient ways to produce. And of course, as they produce more at lower prices, they also create economies of scale. So that is the natural tendency of a market-based economy. If you look at the US, if you look at the CPI in 1900, and then you look at it in 1800, 100 years earlier, prices are down about 50%. Prices are half what they were in 1900 that they were in 1800. The market cut the cost of living in half. We were on a gold standard for most of that time period, other than a few years of the Civil War, where we really started printing money. But in that economy, prices went down. Now, with technology, we should actually be enjoying even faster price declines in this century than they had in the 19th century. The reason we've been robbed of those benefits is because of government. And of course, there is a lot more regulation now than they had then. I mean, the markets are not as free as they used to be, and therefore they're not as efficient as they used to be. And therefore prices aren't going down as much as they would if the government got out of the way and allowed entrepreneurs to be more effective. Instead of having to waste resources and time on government red tape, they could have devoted those resources to becoming more productive.
Yeah, but see, US government has increased red tape, but they have favored the biggest businesses in again evil and corrupt ways.
There's another reason too that they were able to keep the inflation rate low is we outsourced all of our production to China, and so we had all these Chinese workers that would do the work for a fraction of what Americans would, and in factories that didn't have to deal with all the regulations of American factories, and so we got all this stuff coming in from China that helped keep prices down. But the flip side of that was we lost a lot of good paying jobs and we ran massive trade deficits. And so now we have to deal with that problem that we created, trying to kick the can down the road, because you're right about politicians and their time horizon. They can only see as far as their own reelection, which in America, in many cases, is 2 years. And as you said, people want something for nothing. That is the inherent flaw of a democracy. And that's why the founding fathers established America as a republic, not a democracy. And they tried to protect the country from the evil forces of democracy, which they refer to as mobocracy. So we're not supposed to be a democracy for the very reasons that democracies create the type of problems that we now have.
Okay, so I think that's a really important point to zoom in on. So the thing that I think is potentially problematic in this is just the nature of the human mind. And so when I think about why this stuff starts deranging,
guys, you see, from all sides of the political spectrum, economic spectrum, the consensus seems to be that democracy doesn't work, and that is the a bit scary.
That you really can get a free lunch for a while, and if it didn't work in the short term, we wouldn't have these problems. But it really does work, and it can work for a very long time. And so I think it's important for people.
No, Rishabh, actually Elon is absolutely aware of this, which is why he's saying that we need more babies immediately. We need to increase our fertility rate.
To understand the US as a reserve currency, so we have privileges. This conversation only makes sense in the context of the US economy. If you were to take this somewhere else where they can't print their way out of this, it would be a very different scenario. But right now, the world is tied to the US dollar. And so the US dollar is able to create this inflation, actually export some of the negative effects of that inflation. And so this lets us give people a free lunch for a very long time. And it creates this thing where the first order consequence is awesome. So take COVID. I was legitimately worried that people were going to get obliterated by COVID. And they didn't, but they only didn't because of printing money. And so I actually felt good. I was like, oh man, thank God. Like the government stepped in and helped people. The recent regional banking crisis, right, with SVB. I was like, thank God the government's, I didn't have any money. I had very small exposure to that I got out before the government stepped in. So for me, I had no skin in the game once the bank stepped in, but I was still glad they did it.
See, guys, Tom Dalio has been running a company for about 10-15 years now, and he thought that government printing money and giving out stimulus packages during COVID was a great thing. कैसे भाई ये लोग millionaire बन रहे हैं USA में?
Because first order consequences are positive. The second, third, fourth, fifth, on and on and on, consequences become not only hard to calculate, but they really get confusing. And so if you boil the frogs slowly, not only do you get them used to the problem, but you confuse the shit out of them as to what's causing the pain. Does that all make sense?
It makes perfect sense. But everything that you're happy the government did was a mistake.
Yeah.
Now, the reason you're happy they did it was because of the short-term benefit of that mistake. But you don't perceive the actual long-term consequences of doing that. It's like maybe, let's say you're a football player, you're in a game, and you injure your ankle, and the coach is like, look, let me shoot you up with this so you can keep on playing because we want you in a game. And so he shoots you up with this medicine and you don't feel the pain, and so you keep running on your foot, and you're able to finish that game. But because you did that, you screwed up your foot so bad, you're out for the rest of the season.
Yeah.
Right? But they were just thinking about one game, and so you ran on a foot that you shouldn't have run on. You got numb to the pain, and your body was like, hey, don't run on me. Go rest. Ice me for a while. But so that's what the government does. They try to make us numb to the pain, and then we end up doing more damage. And so what happened after COVID, I mean, that policy was horrific. And bailing out the banks, both in 2008 and now again with the bank bailouts we've had this year, all this is a mistake. But again, the politicians want to get reelected, right? They just want to win this game. They don't care about the season. It's this game. And so they're just doing whatever they can to numb us all to the pain. There's a saying.
Yeah, this is a true shortcoming of a democracy. M. Shastri, even you would agree, I guess, that if everything is about just this election cycle, then it's a huge problem. अब कितने देशों में कितना नरेंद्र मोदी और कितना बीजेपी होगा जो कि इतना स्ट्रांगली नैरेटिव क्रिएट कर पाया है कि जो 10-15 साल लग रहा है रहेगा पावर में. तो अगर nothing is about long term good for the country, everything is about the next 5 years, then it's a huge problem.
About a free lunch, that there's no such thing as a free lunch. And that's because somebody's got to pay for that lunch.
Yeah.
So if it's free to you, the question is, who's paying for it? Because the food didn't just magically appear, right? There is a cost. The government can print money, but it can't print stuff. The stuff has to be made. And that's why when you print money without any stuff being made, all that happens is the price of that stuff goes up, right? Because if we could just print money and people could buy stuff,
and
everybody would be rich.
Saying there's no such thing as good freebie and bad freebie, okay? There might be convenient freebie for you to come to power and hope to do good things, but every freebie is a bad freebie because first of all, it's creating bad habits, it's creating inflation, it's taking the taxes of middle class and spending it on poor people who could have afforded it anyway if the taxes weren't so high.
We just print up a bunch of money. Why not give everybody millions of dollars and we all be rich, right? No, the price of everything would just go up. Nobody would be rich. The only way we can all be richer is if we all produce more. Printing more money doesn't change anything.
Yeah.
Right. You're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. You need a more stable boat, right? So we need to make more stuff. That's how we can satisfy more demand, is by creating more supply. If we just print money, we increase demand, supply is the same. And so prices go up. And that's the inflation. But yes, what we were able to do is we were able to con the whole world, the Chinese and a lot of other people, into taking the paper that we print for the stuff they produce, because the dollar is the reserve currency. So instead of actually having to make stuff that the Chinese wanted, we just printed money and said, hey, take this. And now they took all this stuff that they made in factories where they actually had to invest in them, and people had to do hard work, and maybe they were making pollution, whatever. But the Chinese economy expended real resources to produce all kinds of goods that are filling up the shelves in Walmart that Americans are driving home in their big SUVs. And what are they doing? How are we earning all this stuff? The Fed's just printing money and handing it out. What does that cost us? Next to nothing. And so, in the short run, this is a great deal for Americans because we get something for nothing, and the Chinese get nothing for something, except they don't realize they're getting nothing. They think this paper has a lot of value. But in reality, it doesn't, because it's an IOU. It's a claim on U.S. production. But what if, our production is going down? Eventually we're going to wipe all that out with massive inflation when the world doesn't want our dollars anymore, and they try to cash them in.
Guys, Ankit Shah fans here. Are you seeing? This is exactly what Ankit Shah is saying.
When they try to buy stuff, it's like, well, what are you going to buy? We don't have our factories anymore. They're all in China. That money's no good. I mean, we run this giant Ponzi scheme. We have a $33 trillion national debt that continues to grow, trillions of dollars a year, and we finance it like Bernie Madoff did, because we can't pay anybody back. So whenever a bond matures, we find some other sucker to buy it. And when we have to pay our interest, we find suckers to loan us that money too. But this only continues as long as the suckers are willing to keep lending. But when people want their money back, we don't have it. During the debt crisis, we even admitted that we said if we can't go deeper into debt, we're going to default because we're broke. So all this is going to collapse. The dollar is going to lose its reserve currency status.
Right.
And then if Americans want to consume, they're going to have to produce. And that's much harder than printing. And that's going to mean a lot of people who are not...
This is word for word. This is an English translation of Ankit Shah's interviews in Hindi, okay? कि असली काम अब शुरू करना होगा. तुम लोगों को काम आता नहीं है. बैठ के खा रहे थे. अब काम करना पड़ेगा. Also what Vivek is saying, drill, frack and burn coal. Without that, we're not going to be able to do it.
Productive are going to have to start working. And a lot of people who have jobs, they have non-productive jobs. Those jobs aren't going to cut it in a society
Exactly,
where we're
non-productive jobs. M. Shastri, I would like to disagree with you a bit because their textiles can be competitive if they get rid of those fucking minimum wage laws. नहीं तो ये illegal immigrant तो घुसा रहे हैं इसीलिए.
We're creating the reserve currency. They're going to have to go make something.
Okay, so let's look at historical examples, because if I'm taking the flip side of this argument, I'm saying, look, it doesn't have to end in de-dollarization. Even if it does end in de-dollarization, it could happen well like it did for the pound, where the pound sort of slowly over time lost its juice. America rose up, thrown a couple world wars that confuse and discombobulate people. And yeah, you come out the other side, there was no sort of excluding the wars. I want to be very clear that I don't discount the loss of life. Just looking at the economics, that there was a relatively smooth transition from the UK as the dominant global power reserve currency to the US dollar as a dominant world power and currency.
It wasn't actually that smooth. And, if you look back at the days where the pound really dominated global trade, I mean, Britain was an empire. I mean, think about how much influence Britain had all around the world. It's just another country now. I mean, it's like, so Britain is a shadow of what it used to be. So yeah, it doesn't have anywhere near the economic or military power that it once had when it had that position. So to say that, it was easy for Britain. I mean, imagine what happens when America is just another country. It's going to be a big difference. But I think that our economy structurally is more screwed up than the British economy was. And so we're extremely dependent on the dollar status.
Now, really fast, are we in a worse position because of the debt crisis? What makes it worse now?
M. Shastri, you are saying that the farming industry of USA is already filled with illegal immigrants, yet the price of food in the US is 4 times India. US companies don't follow minimum wage when it comes to illegal. Exactly. But I'm saying that until now, even though those illegal immigrants are not following minimum wage laws, which is why they're going on filling the country with illegal immigrants, so that they don't have to follow minimum wage laws. But even then, up till now, it has the cost of living has not gone down because of the printing that has been going on, which I'm guessing won't go on after 2025. After that, illegal immigrants or getting rid of minimum wage laws will actually make things competitive and make things cheaper in USA, isn't it?
No.
And the structure of our economy, we're so dependent. This service sector economy.
Okay, you are saying that there will always be a floor for wages with or without minimum wage, but unless the entire standard of living in USA goes to absolute dogs, which is what Ankit Shah is kind of predicting.
Exist unless it's supplied by the rest of the world. And when the pound was the dominant currency, it was backed by gold. I mean, it was a real money. They couldn't just print it like we've been doing. So the dollar's the reserve currency, even though it's backed by absolutely nothing.
Really fast. So Winston Churchill said the biggest mistake he ever made was reattaching their currency to gold. Out of curiosity, I'm going to guess you think that was a dumb statement on his part. The reason that he said that, I think, is because now seeing how much power it gives America to just print. And this is like the thesis of my argument. You can get away with this shit for so long that the people that pay the price didn't create the problem. And so just emotionally, nobody has to go through. That's not quite true. You'll get increasingly agitated movements like Occupy Wall Street, which we will almost certainly talk about later because I know that you had a very interesting relationship with them. But you'll get increasingly sort of agitated movements like that until something happens and either it breaks or just the kids that end up taking over the government, they just end up doing things differently. But I think that's why he said that, was like, oh my God, we really crippled ourselves and we made it impossible for ourselves to print our way out of this problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons that politicians hate gold, is it forces them to be honest.
Yeah.
And that's the last thing that a politician wants to be. I mean, they don't get elected telling the truth. And if they've been in office for a long time, it's because they're very good liars, because that's how you get reelected. But the public wants gold because we want to keep the politicians honest.
I don't think the public understands gold.
No, well, they don't, because they've been deliberately confused about it by a government that doesn't want the public to understand it, because the government wants to be in charge of the money so that they can manipulate and tax us and try to tinker with the economy in ways that might make their reelection easier. And so we're not on, a gold standard. Again, it's like kids at a high school prom, they don't want the chaperones, right? Because they want to do a lot of things that the chaperones won't approve of. But the parents want the chaperones because they don't want the kids doing that stuff. That's why they're there. So gold is like the chaperone to keep the politicians and the bankers honest. But that's not what they want. They want to be up to no good, and gold stands in their way. That's why if you look at, read, for example, Alan Greenspan's essay, Gold and Economic Freedom, and he wrote this years before he became Fed chairman, but he does a great job of explaining this concept.
So Alan Greenspan was kind of one of the people that you could blame for the 2008 market crash. So he was big on gold actually, but by the time he becomes Fed chairman, he stops doing the things he believes in.
Gold and economic freedom go hand in hand. I mean, we want honest money. We want sound money. I mean, money is supposed to have real value. It's not supposed to just be conjured out into existence out of thin air by a central bank.
Okay, so M. Shastri, what you are saying is that USA is actually even more screwed than what even I'm hoping I'm predicting USA will be. You are saying that it's going to be even more fucked.
We'll get to that in a second. So if Alan Greenspan writes this thing and really understands gold and understands how a true sound money that is tied to something that can't be faked, if he understands that, why when he was Fed chair did he not lobby to get us back on a gold standard?
He was a sellout. I mean, that's why, and he thought, well, he was saying that he was as good as gold. He said he was trying to manage the dollar with the price of gold. In his mind, it was when gold was at 400. So he used to say, if the gold price is above 400, then I know that I'm too easy. If it's below 400, I know I'm too tight. Well, look where we are now, 1900. So clearly the Fed has been too loose based on the barometer that Greenspan had back then. But he had some arrogance, once he got into power. He enjoyed being called the maestro. There's an old saying, Lord Acton, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so you get absolute power over the monetary system. This is what happens. But, I know that if I could have a private conversation with Alan Greenspan, he would very much like the country to go back to a gold standard. He's never repudiated a single word that he wrote in that essay, Gold and Economic Freedom. In fact, I was speaking to Ron Paul about it, who had a birthday the other day. But Ron told me of a story where he was talking to Greenspan.
Ron Paul was basically sort of a Vivek Ramaswamy of 20 years back. His son is Rand Paul. He's also a famous politician now. All his other children are big scientists, lawyers, etc. Ron Paul is a legendary libertarian politician who ran for president and lost. But he started a revolution whose supporters are today basically the anti-war, pure libertarian, non-racist faction of the Republican Party. Before, the Republican Party was all about war. The today's Republican Party that you see, the pro-Donald Trump, pro-Vivek Ramaswamy faction, these are all the people who were basically kids who were looking at Ron Paul with rose-eyed glasses, okay, rose-colored glasses. So that's the Ron Paul he's talking about.
In the halls of Congress, and he had the Atlas Shrugged book, or Capitalism, the Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, and he asked Greenspan, point blank, hey, I've got this book, your article is in here, Gold and Economic Freedom, is there, do you want to, retract any of that, right? Because now you're saying things, and he told Ron Paul, nope, I wouldn't change a word. So he still believed it, regardless of the public persona, he still knew it, he believed it. That's why he was in many ways a hypocrite. But yeah, as bad as Greenspan was. So you see, Alan Greenspan
was writing something and doing the 180 degrees opposite of what he was writing. So M. Shastri is saying automation might break the wage floor, but then again, you'll have to deal with high capital costs. US simply can't manufacture like China. Yeah, of course. But it can manufacture like Japan or Korea, high-end, high-tech, high margins. Let's see.
And of course, when I was forecasting the 2008 financial crisis for years and years, for most of those years, Greenspan was Fed chairman. And so I always blamed the crisis on Greenspan, not necessarily Bernanke, because he inherited the bubble. But
M. Shastri, doesn't that already happen? That high-end, high-tech, high margins, that something that is American-made is already the best in the world and it's the most costly. They do it already. So what will be the change that happens because of, not exactly BRICS currency or de-dollarization, but let's say just this financial reason and the dollar going bust? What happens then? What changes does US have to do in terms of this particular thing which you are saying is going to happen, which I'm saying is already happening? Vinod is saying many Vivek supporters also said that what just happened to Vivek happened to Ron Paul before. Yeah, Ron Paul got completely ostracized and people just, journalists and mainstream media just imagined he doesn't exist. Okay, that's what happened to Bernie Sanders as well in 2016.
Greenspan inflated it. Now, he was oblivious to it, and of course, everything Bernanke did in the aftermath of the financial crisis was a mistake, and we're paying for that mistake, and we're going to pay for that mistake. But Greenspan started it. So I said he was the ace of spades in the deck of cards, trying to figure out who caused the 2008 financial crisis. I wanted to go to Congress and testify because they had a hearing on why we had a financial crisis, and I was like, a kid in class, ooh, pick me, right? Because I had been warning about it. I wrote a book forecasting it. I mean, it basically happened the way I said it would for the exact reasons that I said it would. In fact, I even helped set up a hedge fund that was short the subprime market. I was, got as many people as I could to short subprime in 2006, and then it blew up in 2007. But I knew exactly why we had a financial crisis. I knew exactly what caused it. And so I wanted to go to Congress and testify, but they wouldn't let me. Instead, they had a bunch of people that didn't predict the crisis, that had no idea that it was coming, that were completely blindsided by the crisis, and then they blamed it on the free market. They blamed it on the lack of regulation. They blamed it on everything that had nothing to do with it. It was the Fed, it was Fannie, it was Freddie, it was all these government agencies that caused the problem. That's how I knew it was coming. That's how I knew exactly, the consequences, because I understood the mistakes that they were making. But the people who testified at that hearing made the mistakes. They had no idea why we actually had a crisis. But the real purpose of the hearing was not to find out why we had a crisis, but to blame it on private sector so that we could use that as an excuse to create even more power for the government and the Federal Reserve that collectively caused that crisis. And based on what they did in the aftermath, we're going to have an even worse one. But that was the impetus for the Occupy Wall Street, because if you remember, everybody was protesting all the bailouts and what was going on. And you had this group of people in New York that were mad at the private sector for getting bailed out. For taking, and I wanted to go down there and say, you're mad at the wrong, target. You should be down in Washington on Pennsylvania Avenue. You should be protesting the White House, Congress, the Fed. Don't protest the companies that took the bailouts. Protest the government that gave them the bailout.
Yeah.
I mean, who's not going to take a bailout if it's offered to you, right? It's like if somebody offers your kid a bunch of candy and then your kid eats it. I mean, yeah, what kid's not going to eat candy? You blame the guy that gave him all that candy. And so I said, that's how I went down there to say, look, don't protest.
Nina, not necessarily, because again, illegal immigration. हर रोज लाख लोग घुसा रहे हैं. उन सबको वोटिंग राइट्स दे देंगे. रिपब्लिकन्स जिंदगी में जीतेंगे भी नहीं इलेक्शन में, इसलिए शायद. और वो उन सब लोगों को आर्मी भी सर्व भी करवाएंगे.
Capitalism is the solution to the problems that you're worried about. Protest government, protest socialism, the central bankers. They're your enemy, not private businessmen.
Okay, having seen you debate people down at Occupy Wall Street, I can say that at least people that were a part of that movement, and probably people that are a part of that, a very similar vibe now, would all disagree for one very simple reason. Capitalism is evil. It concentrates money in the hands of a very few who have effectively stolen it from people, either through back alley dealings, back government. I don't know if they'd use the word bribe, but like lobbying government, using official bribery channels, and the like. And when I think about that argument, which I'll let you directly respond to, but to me, the problem feels like you are simply up against human nature, and human nature is such that I want you to give me something now, and I have a very hard time calculating the negative second and third order consequences. And when the second and third order consequences come, people probably, they may not even necessarily be lying, although I heard you about politicians and they do well as they get better at lying. But even being generous and saying they're not lying, they just don't understand it, because this stuff is very complicated. And unfortunately, life has taught me, the moment you're asking the masses to hold a sophisticated idea in their head, that it is never going to work. And you will only, if you ask the masses to hold a sophisticated idea in their head, they will only calculate first order consequences, period. And therefore, anything that happens in second and third order, it is as if it doesn't exist. But then subsequent either years or generations down the road, you get fucking obliterated. And Ray Dalio has clocked this. Every empire that has ever existed, every reserve currency that has ever existed, they have all collapsed. But they all collapse for the same reason. And it's what we're living through right now. And that's why I'm like, what the fuck? Like, I don't see how this isn't inevitable.
Yeah, human nature is one thing that doesn't change. I mean, we're more sophisticated now. We have a lot more technology now, but that hasn't changed. We haven't learned from the mistakes of the past. We just keep on repeating them in an endless loop. But yes, a lot of people believe that capitalism is evil. But capitalism is the least evil economic system that exists. I mean, this is probably because the teachers don't understand this either. And so we have a bunch of kids that learn bad things from teachers who don't get it in these government schools. But it's socialism that's inherently evil, not capitalism. Capitalism is about freedom. Right? It's where individuals are free to transact with one another and pursue their interest, their self-interest, without government intervention. Now, people think, well, then people are just going to exploit other people and take advantage of them and screw them over. But that's not how it works. Because if I want to enrich myself in a system of voluntary interaction, I can't force anybody to buy my products. If I want somebody's money, I have to earn their money. I can't force them. I'm not a government. I can't tax them. I can't take stuff from them against their will. I have to convince them that it's in their self-interest to buy what I want to sell. If I want to hire somebody, I have to pay them more than anybody else is willing to pay them, or I have to give them a combination of pay and benefits and a work environment where they voluntarily accept my offer of employment. I can't constrict them into service like the government at a draft. I can't force you to work for me. I have to give you a deal that you decide to take because it's better than somebody else's deal. And so everybody is acting with one another voluntarily. Capitalists, the way you get rich is I try to figure out, hey, what is something that would make everybody's life better? What do we need that a lot of people don't have? And if they had it, their life would be better. And then I come up with something, or maybe I come up with something, you didn't even realize you wanted it until I showed it to you. And then when you saw it, oh my God, my life would be so much better if I had that. And then you buy it from me. And I get rich because I made your life better. I'm getting rewarded for improving your life. That's capitalism. We all get rewarded for making everybody else's lives better. And it's all about voluntary exchange and interaction. There's no coercion. Nobody is forced to do something that they don't want to do. Compare that to socialism or government. The government forces people to do stuff whether they want to do it or not. Here's this law. You have to abide by that. You can't do this. You must.
And all of that's going to be an even bigger game changer once CBDC happens.
Do that. You have to pay that. You can't do this. This is coercion. This is force. And the government can say, and we're going to take all this money away from you. We don't have to earn your money. We're just taking it. And if you don't give it to us, we're going to put you in jail. There's no businessman that can put you in jail if you don't buy their product or accept their employment offer. They have to entice you to buy their stuff. And so I want to live in a world where people have to win my business, right? Where they have to improve my life, not where they can ruin my life and put me in jail if I don't do what they tell them to do. So that's socialism. And when people think, well, people are inherently evil. They're gonna cheat. They're gonna try to rip me off and give me, poison food and shoddy merchandise. Some people will do that, right? Some people are gonna cut corners and try to pull a fast one. And some people will commit fraud in the marketplace. They'll lie about something. Yeah. But those people are not going to be hugely successful businessmen. The free market will weed them out. They'll go out of business. People will tell their friends, and they'll get bad reviews, and eventually.
And those one or two people will be used by socialists as a face of evil capitalism. But whereas we are continuously in the middle of government failure after government failure all the time, whereas one market failure is end of the world.
They're going to go away. They may make some money in the short run, but if you want to build a good reputation and have a lasting business, you don't do it by ripping off your customers. You do it by serving your customers so they keep coming back and they don't go to your competitor. But yes, there's going to be some bad apples in capitalism. But you know what? There's even more bad apples in socialism. Why people think that businessmen are greedy, but they trust politicians. Those people in government are as greedy as anybody. They want to make money too, but now they have power over you. Now they can make money through corruption, through graft. And if you want to look at these socialist countries, who are the wealthiest people? The people that work for government. They have all the money. They have all the stuff. There's a huge divide. They say, oh, it's going to be, equal. Everybody's going to be equal. Yeah, everybody is equally poor except the people who work for government, and they're rich. And they get rich by stealing money from the public.
Yeah. But in pre-1991 India,
capitalism, people get rich by serving the public. And there's a much better distribution of wealth in capitalism than socialism because you have a middle class. I mean, capitalism created the American middle class. Without capitalism, there wouldn't have been a middle class, right? There would just been a bunch of poor people and then some rich bureaucrats at the top that were sucking the lifeblood out of everybody else.
For the average person today, that does not feel true. For the average person today who economic mobility has begun to decrease, and look, I doubt you know much about my background, I could not be a more diehard capitalist. But I want to make sure that we steel man the flip side of that coin. So for somebody that's growing up now, call it just bad luck of timing. And boomers created a system that just drained the wealth. They've trapped it and it's not getting back into the system. Whatever reasoning ends up being the right analysis in the final look at this. But nonetheless, economic mobility has scaled back. You get people like Ray Dalio, who I think has looked at this problem more closely than just about anybody. And he's like, look, we do need to make changes to the system. Otherwise, you're just going to keep getting this massive divide. And for people familiar with the Gini coefficient, if you want people to fight, then have people that have massive wealth and people with no wealth be next to each other. Because all you care about is what your neighbor has. And so that's what we're getting right now, right? So people are just like, fuck this guy. Like, he's got so much money. Elon Musk, he's making, whatever, he's worth $160 billion. He's hoarding that money. That's all money that would have gone to me. But now I'm not getting it because this asshole has all that money. And so I think they have identified the wrong solution, but they're not wrong that there's a problem. Like, growing up in the 80s, I really felt like I could do anything. And now my life becomes proof that that's true. I did not grow up with money, but I've made a lot of money.
You don't get rich by hoarding your money, because if your money is hoarded, it doesn't grow. The way people get rich is by investing their money, by creating economic growth, by producing more products, providing more employment. So the last thing you want to do is take that wealth away from the rich, because they use it so productively. They're not just sitting on a pile of cash in their backyard. Their wealth is out there working and growing the economy. But the reason that we have so much less upward mobility than we could have is because of all the roadblocks that government has placed in people's paths that wouldn't be there but for government. I mean, it's very hard now for someone just to get a job because we've made it so difficult to employ people. If you want to go out and hire people, the government says, well, here's a minimum wage. You can't hire somebody if they have very low skills and they're worth less than the minimum wage. So immediately you price a lot of people out of the labor market because they're not worth the minimum wage. Otherwise, you might hire them if you could do it at $4 an hour, but you won't do it at $9 an hour.
Yeah.
Now you might say, well, why would somebody work at $4 an hour? Well, they have no skills and they want to get some skills. If you have no skills and you want to get some skills, the best way to get them is to get a job and learn them. And so, in many cases, you're paying somebody $4 an hour to teach them how to do something. But once they learn how to do it, then you have to pay them more money, or they're going to quit and they're going to go someplace else. But we also have all these employment taxes that increase employment costs, make it more expensive to hire people, Social Security, unemployment. And then we also empower workers where you can sue your boss 8 ways from Sunday. I mean, one of the easiest things to do in America is sue your boss. And that means that people are reluctant to hire. Who the hell wants to get sued? And so a lot fewer people get hired because the employer doesn't want to risk a lawsuit. And this is particularly problematic for minorities, who may have a greater tendency to sue because they can bring up discrimination and stuff like that. It's so easy to claim, oh, I got fired because I'm African American, or I didn't get promoted because I'm a woman, or I was handicapped. I mean, there's different things you could say, or somebody insulted me at work. I mean, so employers want to reduce their legal liability, and they do that by hiring fewer people, by outsourcing to other countries, by automating where they might prefer a human, but the computer can't sue them. So the government has just made it very difficult for people to climb up the economic ladder, because in many cases, the first few rungs of that ladder have been destroyed.
And this brings to mind Karnataka. Remember, a few months back, we were discussing that how stupid the decision of CPIM was, that CPIM's policies made sure that there's no employment and there's no industry and capitalism in West Bengal, which is why so many people were jobless. Then CPIM started giving out जॉबलेसनेस बेनिफिट्स. ओके, जो चीज़ के वजह से हुआ है जॉबलेसनेस, वो एग्जैसरबेट करने के लिए जॉबलेस बेनिफिट्स दिया गया. अब कर्नाटका में सेम चीज़ हो रहा है. कर्नाटका में अब जॉबलेस बेनिफिट दे रहा है, अलाउंस दे रहा है यूथ को.
By the government. And so if we could just have a free country, when my grandfather came to this country, they didn't have any of these laws. There was no minimum wage. There was no welfare. There was no unemployment. There was no Social Security. He came with nothing. He didn't even speak the language. He was like 12 or 13, but he got a job right away. And then eventually he had his own little business and he employed people. But, he didn't have to do all this with his employees either. I mean, I don't even think he kept track of how much money he made, because why keep track? There was no taxes to pay. It was a free country, right? You can concentrate on running your business, not figuring out how much you had to cut the government in on. The only taxes were sales taxes, which was easy.
This was your
Somebody
dad
buys
or
a product
your
and pay a tax. My grandfather.
Your dad or your grandfather? Okay.
My grandfather.
So there was no tax?
They didn't have income taxes. They didn't have Social Security taxes. The only taxes you had, it was like a tariff. You didn't even see the tariffs, right? Because they were embedded in the products. And the cities, the locals, they did have like sales tax. But that's it. That's all there was. Nobody had to fill out forms. Nobody had any money taking out of their paycheck. I mean, that's what America used to be like. And people weren't starving. People weren't dying for lack of medical care. If you didn't have money, doctors worked for nothing. I mean, we ran great. Government was tiny, 100 years ago, 1900, 1890, 1910. Now we didn't have as much technology then as we have now, but, can you imagine if the government had stayed in the same relative size that it was in 1900, if we never had an income tax, corporate income tax, personal income tax, we never had all these government programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, right? If we had just stayed the same, you wouldn't even recognize America today. We would be so wealthy, it would be unrecognizable. The living standard of the average American would be unlike anything that we see today on Earth. But we were robbed of all of those benefits because we gave up on capitalism and we went all in on almost on socialism, and we really transformed the nation. And we've all suffered, whether we realize it or not.
और वो सोशलिज्म भी entirely टैक्स के पैसों से नहीं आया, वो सोशलिज्म फ्रीबीज भी आया पैसे प्रिंट करके, जिसकी वजह से और भी इन्फ्लेशन हुआ. Nina is saying that Argentina was one such socialist case. Yeah, now Milei has come, he has thrown away every price limit in existence. He's even letting free market decide which currency should be. Yeah, in short term, though, Argentina is going to be a phenomenal country.
So I am hearing this as somebody who is very skeptical of capitalism. I'm thinking law of the jungle is the strong will do what they will and the weak will suffer as they must. And the whole idea behind a government is that you're going to protect the smaller person. You're going to create the environment where they can be successful. And what I hear you saying is that, oh, everybody is so magically kind that if we had a true
that's not what Peter Schiff is saying. It's not about being magically kind. It's not about good people and bad people. It's about what's there an incentive to do.
Doctors will take care of the sick for free. Nobody's going to die on the stair steps. Pregnant women aren't going to die in childbirth in their homes because they were too poor to go to the hospital. They look around and they see they see us in late stage capitalism. We tried it, Peter, and it led to derangement. It led to evil behavior. If it wasn't for things like Obamacare, just the number of people that would be dying in the streets. This is crazy. You're just a rich guy speaking your book right now.
Yeah, that's just government lies. I mean, the freest period of time in American history, really, was from the end of the Civil War.
So many diseases for which you don't even get insurance from and reimbursement from if you are on Obamacare, which you have paid into, by the way. Your taxes are going into Obamacare, but Obamacare is not paying for that specific disease.
War to the beginning of the First World War. That was really when we were the freest, right? No more slavery, so African Americans had been freed, and we were on a very solid gold standard during that period of time. That was the Industrial Revolution. You've never seen a period of time where real incomes rose faster, where real GDP grew faster than during those years. And that's when we had the least amount of government really in history. Look, the conditions to achieve success exist naturally. All the government can do is diminish those conditions by imposing barriers. Now, it's not that I'm saying, hey, we shouldn't have any laws. Yeah, local governments, yeah, should it be illegal to defraud
Healthcare
somebody?
in US is 100% a scam, yes, Mshastri, and it's the worst of all worlds. I have an argument that the hospitals administration, hospital infrastructure might be bad here, good there, but overall, I think healthcare overall system-wise, France and India's is best. I would say India's is even better because it's so many people are being handled in the Indian system. I think there's real choice in the Indian system.
Yes, we shouldn't just, hey, you can
And by the way, Obamacare was also a stolen thing. Barack Obama basically appropriated Bob Dole's plan and named it on his own. Bob Dole was a Republican. It was his plan. It was not even a Democrat plan. He just copy-pasted it, and then called it Obamacare.
As long as you get away with it. No, because in a free market, you can do whatever you want. You just can't harm somebody else. Right? So I can't deliberately steal your stuff. Right? Theft is wrong. I have to earn money. I can't steal your money, which means I can't defraud you out of your money. So that's still a crime. Right? I still want to punish criminal behavior because everybody has to respect everybody else's rights. Like my freedom to move my fist stops at your face. I can do whatever I want with my fist. I just can't hit you. The minute I hit you, I violated your rights, right? So we have to leave each other alone. But that doesn't mean that if I see somebody starving on the street, I'm going to leave them alone. I'm a human being, right? I'm going to care about my fellow man. See, I have no problem.
Yeah, Nina, exactly. The price has settled within few weeks or months. Yeah, few weeks. So यही तो होगा. ये तो मदरचोद सोशलिस्ट नहीं समझते या फिर समझते हैं तो बोलेंगे नहीं कि प्राइसेस अगर अच्छा इवेल कैपिटलिस्ट है सब कुछ इतना हाई प्राइस कर देगा. अरे कोई खरीद नहीं पाएगा अगर तो कैपिटलिस्ट खुद क्या खाएगा. उसके पास वो सैलरी मतलब वो चीज़ बेच के ही तो उसका बिजनेस चलेगा. अगर उसने ऐसा प्राइस बना देगा कि कोई भी उसका चीज़ अफोर्ड नहीं कर पा रहा है तब कैसे चलेगा. उसको प्राइस कम करवाना पड़ेगा.
Voluntary charity. And we had plenty of that before the government took it over. I mean, you talk about doctors. Doctors did so much pro bono stuff for free when they didn't have to pay income taxes. They didn't have, all these other, paperwork and forms, that they could actually be doctors instead of government bureaucrats. They had a lot more free time, and they didn't have to charge as much for their services. But people should be free to voluntarily donate money to people in need and help them out. What is wrong is when the government steals money from somebody because they claim somebody else needs it. That's wrong. Theft is immoral just because the government is doing the stealing. And if you rob from the rich and give to the poor, it's still wrong. Even if the poor need the money, the ends don't justify the means. The rich have to voluntarily donate to the poor, which they will. But here is the unfortunate reality of government running
before he makes his point, I want to clarify something. Imagine a socialist is watching our conversation here and he says that, see, just in the above comment, M. Shastri is saying that $800 for a bottle of saline, $150 for the bottle, etc. So if market takes care of it, why is this price increase happening? This price increase is happening because those companies know the government will tax people and pay for it anyway. So who is the real loser here? The person who is in great health, who is actually not getting sick, and the person who by chance, because of his mismanagement of his finances, does not have a proper health insurance. He is completely fucked. And if you want a saline here and there, just for one small reason, it's not like some elaborate long disease you have, then you are fucked completely. Because the companies decided, अरे ये तो government तो हमको पैसा दे ही देगा, तो चलो increase कर देते हैं price, क्या problem है?
Is every government has a huge bureaucracy. So in order for a government to give the poor 10 cents, they have to take $1 from everybody else. It's very inefficient. But if you look at private charities, they raise $1 and the poor get 90 cents.
Yeah.
It's a much more efficient way to help people if you keep the government out of it. Plus, and this is probably the more important factor, the government wants to perpetuate poverty because they want to perpetuate their own existence. So if you're in charge of this anti-poverty program, the last thing you want is to eliminate poverty because you're out of a job, right? Your job is...
Yeah, Nina, there's a 20-year window, I think, that if you come up with a drug, for 20 years you can charge anything, then after that it becomes a generic drug, your copyright over the drug decreases, and then everyone can make the same drug, then the price of that drug decreases.
I want more poverty so I can get a bigger budget, and so they design these welfare systems that create dependency. But a private charity doesn't want the people to stay poor. It wants them to not need the charity anymore. It wants to give them a hand up, not a handout. So you want the private sector to be doing these things. You don't want to turn over this function to government. There's a few things that I think government could do well, but charity is not one of them. Neither is education. Neither is healthcare. Those are things where the government should stay completely out because all they do is screw it up.
Okay, so what do you say to the people that are choking to death on the idea that we were at our freest, and you use the word freest, so I don't want to put words in your mouth to say we're at our best or anything like that, but that we were at our freest from post-Civil War to World War I, because they're thinking, bro, we didn't even have civil rights. Like, this is crazy. Like, people were being abused in ways that by a modern standard we cannot fathom.
First of all, I don't believe in these civil rights. I believe in individual rights, right? Everybody has rights because they're an individual. Nobody has special privileges because they're a member of a group, right? So, I'm Jewish, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I don't have special rights because of my Judaism. I'm older now. I'm 60. I don't have senior rights, right? I don't have different rights than I had when I was 40 or 30. But other people that fall into certain groups, I mean, if you're African American, you don't have special rights because you're African American. If you're homosexual, you don't get extra rights because you're homosexual. We all have the same rights. Doesn't matter which group we happen to fall into. We all have the same individual rights. What people are trying to do is get special privileges from government because they're a member of a particular group, and that's wrong. That's a faction. So I think we're actually worse off now than we were before we had all these so-called civil rights, because what they really are limitations on individual rights. Because what the government is saying is you can't do this. Like, for example, if I'm a religious person and I don't want to participate in a gay wedding, right? I don't want to bake a wedding cake for a gay wedding, and I'm just religious. The government says, no, you can't do that. You got to bake that cake whether you want to or not. We don't give a damn about your own religious beliefs. You've got to do something that you don't want to do. That's wrong. You're limiting individual rights. If I own a bakery, I can decide. If I want to turn down your business, I don't want your money, then get somebody else to bake your cake. There's plenty of people who will take the money. So I just think that we've all lost rights in the name of giving other people privileges. So the country is less free now. People say, people shouldn't discriminate. Well, you know what? You have a right to discriminate. It's not, you can't tell me, hey, you can't discriminate against me. Well, yes, you can. It's a free country. You can just, you can do it. You can associate with whoever you want. You can hire whoever you want. I can't tell you that you can't discriminate against me. I mean, it's your business. You decide who your customers are going to be, who your employees are going to be. That's up to you. And if you can survive in the marketplace, then you survive. That's life. That's how you live in a civilization. Today, everybody wants to force everybody else to tolerate anything that they do, and that's wrong. And people don't want to be offended. Oh, he said something that hurt my feelings. Toughen up. That's life. You don't have a right not to have hurt feelings. People can express their opinion, even if that opinion causes you to feel bad about something. I mean, that's being an adult living in a society. We all have freedom of expression. We have free speech. That means we can say things that other people disagree with, that other people think are offensive. And if you don't like that, then you got to go someplace else.
All right. I think people are going to be more outraged by the idea that you have a right to discriminate than they will by you saying that the government is the root of all of our economic problems. So help me understand. So my immediate reaction is, okay, discrimination can get pretty nasty. And we have seen where people enshrine that in law, and it makes things, from my perspective,
that's different. It can't be in the law. So you're right. Like back prior to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, you had southern states where the governments were mandating discrimination, and that was absolutely wrong. Right? The government should never tell a business you must have a white bathroom and a black bathroom. That's wrong. Now, if the business on its own decides that that's what I want to do, well, that's a different thing. But the big problem down south was not that businessmen wanted to discriminate. The government was forcing them to discriminate. It was government that caused all these problems, not capitalism. Because if you're a business, you're going to try to appease your customers. You're going to try to get as many customers as you want. You're not going to try to piss them off. Even if you're a racist. Let's say I was down south, and whatever reason I don't like blacks, I still want them to shop in my store. I still want their money. And so but it was these government laws that were forcing discrimination that never would have existed. So yes, I mean, in that respect, there was less freedom in that one aspect. But I would say that even though African Americans faced that type of discrimination down south because of government, not because of capitalism, on balance, they were still freer. Because there wasn't even that. That wasn't even that big a problem back in 1780.
This is entirety of Thomas Sowell's research that their lives were in many ways actually better than it is now, because after all it was a 2-parent household, stable family, good income, not good income. I mean, whatever there was, it was all stable. They were not living in a crime-infested neighborhood. There was not gang violence every day. There was not one single mother with 50 boyfriends.
1990, 1900. You didn't have as big an issue. But
guys, I really need to go pee. So I'll let this go on and come back.
Income tax, no IRS, no Social Security. They didn't have all these forms. They didn't have to keep all these records. If they wanted to start a business, they could just start it. They didn't need all these forms. They didn't need all these licenses. They didn't have all these bureaucrats. They didn't have to hire accountants. They didn't have to hire lawyers. So I think overall, the level of freedom was higher. But yes, I am glad that we made it illegal for these southern states to force private businesses and private individuals to discriminate when they didn't want to. But that's different than having a private individual decide on their own if they want to discriminate. That's totally different. I mean, if you want to choose to do that, then you've got to suffer the consequences. Like the woman, I just made an example, somebody didn't want to bake the wedding cake for a gay wedding. Okay, now they lost out on the money. They can't, that's the business they turned down. I mean, there's plenty of bakers that don't care, that don't have any problem with gay marriage. I mean, if I ran a bakery, give me all the gay wedding cakes you want. I'll bake them all. I mean, wedding cakes are like the holy grail of cakes. If you're a baker, you're waiting for an order for a wedding cake. You make a lot of money on those things. So the more gay weddings, the better if I'm making wedding cakes. But if somebody else has a moral problem with it, that's their business. And I wouldn't, look, I'm Jewish. If I went into a cake, I wanted to buy a cake for my kid's bar mitzvah. And I went in there and I said, hey, I want you to bake a bar mitzvah cake. And the guy said, oh, I don't like to bake bar mitzvah cakes. I don't like Jews. I mean, I'm okay. I'm going to go someplace else. I'm not going to care. I'm not going to sue the guy. In fact, if there's an anti-Semite, I'd rather that person tell me up front that, hey, I don't like Jews, so I go and take my business someplace else. Because what if he just took my money and then spit in the cake or whatever? I mean, I'd rather have the anti-Semite, let me know right off the bat so I don't work with him. But we make now, no, I got to file a lawsuit. I got to force this guy to bake this cake. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's interesting, though, and I think it's a sign of the problem that I think we're really battling and that I'm trying to find the edges of in this conversation, which is what you are up against is human nature. You are up against people. You are up against the way that they think, the way that they act. And when you get them into large groups, you get these societal movements that either are moving in the right direction or meaning they help more people thrive, or they are moving in the wrong direction and they begin to curtail things, adding back in the complexity of first order consequence good. Like, I'll be honest, the first order consequences of all the things you just said, they sound awesome. Like civil rights, awesome. Making people, I don't know, I'd have to think about the cake one. I won't take a stance on that. But these things sound like, it sounds right. Like that
Tom
somebody
Dalio is a bit of that beer biceps monkey balancing. He's not going to take a stance on the cake thing. Because if you are a religious devout Christian who is against homosexuality and you are being forced by the government to bake a cake for a gay wedding, Tom Dalio does not have a stance on that. क्या अजीब आदमी है भाई, ये क्या capitalist बनेगा?
shouldn't discriminate. They shouldn't be unkind. And that brings me, hold on, because I'm not justifying my position on that. I'm just saying that's my initial reaction, is I like the idea of somebody being taken care of. The problem is where I start to worry about the state of the economy, and there are physics to the economy. It works in a certain way. This is all tied to individuals and how people are and what they act like when they come together in a collective, is that right now, and maybe always, the thing that we're up against with a movement, I'll make a prediction. Every economy ever in the history of all time will, if they start as a capitalist economy, will move towards socialism. And the reason I think that will happen in a loop is as things get better and capitalism pulls you out of difficulty and creates a thriving middle class and things are going well and things are looking up and better than ever, you're the reserve currency, yay, like things are awesome, that you start going, ooh, but I don't want to see people suffer. I don't want to see tragedy.
It's not, the inherent flaw isn't capitalism, it's democracy. So if you have a democracy and capitalism, then you're going to have that, because it's the voters that are falling.
Because of the prosperity created by capitalism, because of democracy, the politicians who are just looking at the next 5-10 years, they are going to come and say that, okay, since there's so much prosperity, why not distribute free money? And then the distortions in the capitalist system is going to come about. So it's not that because of the prosperity people are thinking, चलो अब गरीब लोगों का थोड़ा भला करते हैं. अरे भाई, गरीब लोगों का हाल खराब हो ही गया गवर्नमेंट पॉलिसीज की वजह से.
Victim to the politicians that say, hey, look at that guy's richer than you. That's not fair. Let's take some of his money.
Yeah.
And you're more deserving, right? And the public doesn't get it, and they vote for this. But the capitalism itself is not creating the problem. It's creating the prosperity that enables the politicians to now play on people's greed and their envy and all the lowest common denominator. But I wanted to also just talk about discrimination, because people shouldn't discriminate. It's bad. Look, everybody discriminates in their private lives. I mean, you discriminate on who your friends are going to be. I mean, you have certain characteristics that you look for in your friends. Not everybody is your friend, and you discriminate when you're dating, when you're marrying. I mean, there are all sorts of. I mean, I'm a straight guy, but I mean, there are all sorts of women that right off the bat, I'm not going to date you. I'm not going to date you. Because you have tastes and you have certain things that you prefer, and you discriminate against the women that don't have what you like as a man in a partner or whatever. So we all discriminate. Now the question is, well, if I can discriminate in my personal life, can I discriminate in my business life? And I don't make a distinction. If I decide to start a business, I don't surrender my rights because I have a business. Just like my customers. I mean, people, you can discriminate among businesses. Let's say I'm African American and I want to patronize a business that's owned by an African American. I can do that. If I don't shop at some store owned by a white guy, he can't sue me and say, hey, you should have come to my store. Why'd you go to this guy? I mean, he's black and I'm white, and you're just going over there. You're discriminating against me because I'm white.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's people right now. There's businesses that want to help African Americans that are going out of their way to try to hire them, and now they're getting sued for that. It's like, look, if you want to do that, you're a business. You can decide that that's what you want to do, but you also have to accept the consequences. If you discriminate for an irrational reason, right? If I'm a businessman and I've just got a prejudice, and so I'm gonna deliberately not hire people that are in particular groups because I just, whatever reason, don't like those groups, I'm not going to be as competitive as people who don't consider those factors, right? The companies that are going to be the most successful in a capitalist system are those that only discriminate on relevant characteristics, which would be competence and skill level and other characteristics, honesty, punctuality. I mean, you want to hire the right people. And irrelevant characteristics, what gender they are, what race they are, what sex, but now sometimes they may be a factor, because there are some jobs that I might determine, hey, this job is going to be better performed by a man. Being a man actually, maybe it's a physically challenging.
Living wage is a bullshit arbitrary term made up by socialists in USA. It means that whatever the job, even if it's a kid's part-time job in McDonald's, okay, which he does only for pocket money, even that has to be a living wage, which is to say he has to be able to survive and sustain his entire livelihood just with that part-time salary. job of McDonald's, okay? Even that has to be, McDonald's has to pay living wage to that person. He should not have to do 2-3 pocket money jobs. Everyone has to pay living wage.
Job, or there's something about it that men are more likely, or some jobs women are more likely to succeed but it's up to the businessman to decide and then live with the consequences, because the people who are discriminating are not going to do as well, and they'll go out of business. But what happens now with all these anti-discrimination laws, a lot of people who otherwise would not discriminate end up discriminating. That's the irony of all this, because the government has made it so easy to get sued. And I know this because I've spoken to businessmen, small business owners, who are reluctant to hire African Americans, or in some cases women, or somebody who's where they can tell that they're gay. They don't want to hire these people.
Yeah.
Not because they have any prejudices against them. They don't. But they're afraid of getting sued. They're afraid of what might happen if they don't work out and they have to terminate them.
Yes, I've heard that there are some internal, unwritten sort of directives given out to people from top down in some private companies, in pretty reputed big private companies as well, that unless it's absolutely necessary, don't hire a woman. Unless now they want those ESG, DI points, etc. For that they hire women again. But before that, and up until when I was working in an office in 2014, 2015, 16, there was a directive going around in some companies that avoid hiring women as much as possible, because the tone you can take with a male employee in terms of criticism, friendly banter, both, you can't take that with a woman. And who knows when the fuck she files a sexual harassment complaint against you, or starts crying in the office, and it's a complete disaster in that moment.
Or maybe one of their other employees says something that offends them, and then if you're running a very small business, you have 3 or 4 or 5
employees. Some Muslim women I had heard in some big company in US sued her employees because someone wished her Merry Christmas in the office in USA.
Please. The safest thing you could do is just hire white men. Then you're pretty much bulletproof, right? Straight white men. No one's going to sue you. I mean, it's possible, but it's very unlikely, right?
Because you're saying they're the least protected group.
They're the ones. It's very hard to say he fired me because I'm a white man. I mean, no one's going to buy that. Right? I mean, it's like, or he fired me because I'm straight. I mean, so businessmen look at somebody coming for a job interview, and if they're one of these groups that can sue you easily because they can claim you discriminated against them, there's like a big flashing sign on their head, don't hire me, don't hire me. Or you've got to be so good that it's worth the risk to the employer of hiring you, right? Because they think, okay, this guy's not going to sue me. But nobody. It's so expensive.
Okay, this is more like a free market course now, crash course. Is it anything about de-dollarization anymore? Otherwise, let's end the live stream today then. This was a great discussion. This is not going to touch on de-dollarization anymore. Thank you for joining the live stream, guys. It was a great discussion. We need a economics crash course also someday, but we will check it out on some other topic on some other day, and based on some Thomas Sowell talking points as well. We will touch upon those topics on some other day. Tomorrow or day after tomorrow, we will get back to some animal rights discussions. I have a live stream planned on that. Okay. Good night, guys.